Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Officer Marcus Chen thought he was getting a routine assignment when the Department of Environmental Protection requested Forbidden Area police assistance for a chemical contamination investigation in Sector 7 Alpha. What he didn't expect was for his radiation detector to start picking up readings that defied every known law of physics, and to hear voices warning him about dangers that hadn't happened yet. The call came in at 05:30 hours on October 15, 2024, piercing through the pre-dawn silence of the FAP Chemical Response Unit headquarters in Bakersfield, California. Chen had been working with the Forbidden Area Police for 18 months, specializing in patrol duties within America's most dangerous restricted zones. These were areas cordoned off due to industrial accidents, military weapons testing, or environmental disasters that posed ongoing threats to public safety and national security. Unit Charlie 7. We have a Priority Alpha environmental assessment request from EPA Region 9, came the crisp voice of dispatcher Sarah Kowalski through Chen's radio as he finished his pre-shift equipment check. Sector 7 Alpha showing anomalous satellite readings. DEP requesting immediate ground truth verification with full hazmat protocols. Chen acknowledged the call while reviewing the classified briefing materials that appeared on his secure terminal. Sector 7 Alpha, located 43 miles northeast of Bakersfield in the Tehachapi Mountains, had been sealed since 1987 following a catastrophic failure at the Meridian Chemical Processing Facility. The incident had released over 200,000 gallons of mixed industrial chemicals, including methylisocyanate, benzene compounds, and radioactive isotopes used in specialized manufacturing processes. The facility had been part of a classified defense contract, producing chemical components for military applications that remained classified even 37 years later. What was known was that the explosion and subsequent chemical release had contaminated nearly 12 square miles of terrain, creating one of the most toxic environments in North America. The exclusion zone had been maintained under joint FAPEPA authority ever since, with access limited to essential monitoring and emergency response personnel. According to the morning briefing, recent satellite imagery from the National Reconnaissance Office had detected heat signatures and spectral anomalies suggesting that chemical compounds were migrating beyond the established containment perimeter. If confirmed, this could mean that toxic materials were approaching the groundwater systems that supplied 3 rural communities and several agricultural operations. Chen suited up in his Level A protective gear, a process that took nearly 20 minutes to complete properly. The fully encapsulated chemical protective suit was constructed of specialized polymers designed to resist penetration by the most dangerous industrial chemicals. The ensemble included a self-contained breathing apparatus with a 4-hour air supply, integrated cooling system, emergency decontamination shower, and comprehensive monitoring equipment that could detect over 400 different chemical compounds and radiation types. His partner for this operation was Officer Sarah Rodriguez, a 6-year veteran of the Chemical Response Unit who had specialized training in environmental forensics. Rodriguez would be conducting perimeter security and communication support, while Chen entered the hot zone with EPA environmental scientist Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had been studying the Meridian contamination site since the original incident. "Remember, Chen," Rodriguez said as they performed the mandatory buddy check of each other's protective equipment. The briefing materials indicate we might be dealing with previously uncharacterized chemical compounds. The original incident involved experimental military chemicals that were never fully cataloged. If your detector starts showing readings that don't make sense, don't second-guess the equipment. Chen nodded, testing his radio communications and emergency beacon systems. The FAP's standard operating procedures for contaminated zone operations were among the most stringent in federal law enforcement, developed through hard-won experience in dozens of environmental disaster sites across the United States. Dr. Walsh arrived at the staging area at 07:15 hours, driving a specialized EPA mobile laboratory equipped with atmospheric monitoring systems, soil analysis equipment, and communication links to the Environmental Response Team headquarters in San Francisco. She was a slight woman in her early 50s with graying hair and intense brown eyes that reflected decades of experience investigating environmental disasters. "Good morning, Officer Chen," she said, extending a gloved hand as she emerged from her vehicle, already wearing her own protective gear. "I've been monitoring this site for 17 years, and I've never seen readings like what we detected yesterday. The spectral analysis suggests chemical reactions that shouldn't be possible with the compounds we know were released in 1987. They proceeded through the security checkpoint at the perimeter of Sector 7 Alpha, a double fence barrier topped with razor wire and equipped with motion sensors, radiation detectors, and automated warning systems. Signs in English and Spanish warned of lethal chemical contamination, with specific warnings about vapor inhalation, skin contact, and the risk of explosive chemical reactions. Chen activated his handheld radiation detector, a state-of-the-art Ludlam Model 3030 that could simultaneously monitor alpha, beta, gamma, and neutron radiation, while detecting volatile organic compounds, toxic gases, and chemical vapors. The device immediately began clicking steadily as they passed through the outer perimeter, indicating the elevated background radiation that had persisted in the area for nearly 4 decades. The landscape beyond the fence was like something from another planet. Decades of chemical exposure had created a dead zone, where the normal vegetation had been replaced by twisted, mutated plant growth that had somehow adapted to the toxic environment. The ground was covered with a thin layer of crystallized chemical residue that crunched underfoot, while the air shimmered with heat distortion caused by ongoing chemical reactions in the contaminated soil. The original facility covered about 200 acres, Dr. Walsh explained as they walked along a gravel path that had been laid down by cleanup crews in the 1990s. Most of the buildings were demolished after the incident, but the foundations and underground storage areas are still intact. That's where we think the new contamination is originating. Chen was studying his detector readings when the first anomaly occurred at 08:47 hours, approximately 200 meters inside the restricted zone. The device suddenly began producing readings that made no scientific sense. Instead of the expected gradual increase in radiation levels as they approached the former facility, the detector displayed a sharp spike to 500 millirems per hour, followed immediately by a complete null reading showing 0 radiation, then resumed normal background detection within seconds. Command, Unit Charlie 7, experiencing equipment anomaly. Chen radioed to the FAP dispatch center. Radiation detector showing intermittent spikes to 500 millirems followed by 0 readings. Cycle repeating every 30 seconds. Request technical support evaluation. The response came immediately from Dispatcher Kowalski. Unit Charlie 7 acknowledged. Technical support advises checking battery levels and sensor calibration. Your equipment was serviced and certified yesterday. Do you require backup detection equipment? Chen performed the standard field diagnostics on his detector while Dr. Walsh continued taking atmospheric readings with her own instruments. Battery levels were optimal at 98%. Sensors showed proper calibration across all detection modes, and the device's internal diagnostic systems reported no malfunctions. Yet the impossible readings continued. Precise spikes to exactly 500 millirems, followed by complete nulls, repeating with mechanical regularity. "This is very strange," Dr. Walsh said, reviewing data on her portable spectrometer. "My equipment is detecting chemical compounds that don't appear in any database. The molecular signatures suggest organic compounds that incorporate both heavy metals and radioactive isotopes in ways that shouldn't be chemically stable." As Chen completed his equipment check, something even more disturbing began happening. His radiation detector started producing a series of rapid clicks in a specific pattern. 3 short clicks, 3 long clicks, 3 short clicks, the universal distress signal in Morse code. But mixed in with the mechanical clicking, barely audible through his headset, Chen could swear he heard something else. A faint human voice, heavily distorted by static, speaking in urgent whispers. "Don't go to Building 7. Chemical vapor cloud forming. Evacuate grid sector Charlie 9 immediately. Atmospheric inversion trapping toxic gases." Chen stopped walking and keyed his radio. "Dr. Walsh, did you just transmit any warnings about Building 7 or grid sector Charlie 9? "Negative, Officer Chen. I haven't mentioned any specific buildings. Are you receiving transmissions from another unit? "Command, Unit Charlie 7. Are there any other FAP units operating in Sector 7 Alpha today? I'm receiving what sounds like emergency radio traffic about specific hazard locations. Unit Charlie 7, negative. You are the only authorized personnel in the restricted zone. All other agencies have been notified of your operation. EPA, DEA, and Homeland Security have confirmed no overlapping operations." Chen felt a chill despite the insulated environment of his protective suit. He had distinctly heard someone warning about dangers ahead, but there was no one else on the radio frequency who could have made that transmission. The FAP's communication systems operated on encrypted channels specifically allocated for law enforcement operations in hazardous environments. They continued forward, following the marked path toward the remains of the main processing facility. Chen noticed that his detector's anomalous readings were becoming more frequent and more complex. Instead of simple spike and null patterns, the device was now displaying rapidly changing numbers that seemed to correspond to their movement through the contaminated zone. At 0923 hours, as they approached a cluster of concrete foundations that had once supported chemical storage tanks, Chen's detector began the strange clicking pattern again. This time, multiple whispered voices overlapped each other through his headset. "Methyl isocyanate leak detected. Building 12 basement level. Containment failure imminent. Estimate 30 minutes to catastrophic release. Radiation exposure exceeding safe limits. Withdraw to decontamination station. Cesium-137 concentration increasing. Chemical interaction creating toxic gas cloud. Wind direction shifting northeast. Civilian population at risk." The voices were clearer now, and Chen realized they sounded exactly like radio transmissions from emergency responders. But the quality was wrong. The voices had a hollow, distant quality, as if they were coming from very far away or through some kind of atmospheric distortion. More disturbing was the technical accuracy of the warnings. Chen's training had taught him to recognize the symptoms of methyl isocyanate exposure, and the voice had used precisely the correct terminology and time estimates. "Dr. Walsh, I'm picking up what sounds like detailed emergency radio traffic on my equipment. Multiple voices discussing specific chemical hazards and contamination levels. Are you receiving any unusual transmissions?" Dr. Walsh looked up from her soil sampling equipment, her face mask fogging slightly with exertion. "No, Officer Chen, my communication equipment is functioning normally. Could you be receiving bleed over from other radio systems? Sometimes atmospheric conditions can cause unusual propagation effects." Chen knew that was highly unlikely. His FAP radio was not only encrypted, but operated on frequencies specifically reserved for federal law enforcement operations in hazardous environments. Civilian, local police, or even most military radio traffic shouldn't be able to interfere with his equipment. As they approached the remains of the main processing facility, a maze of broken concrete slabs, twisted metal debris, and partially collapsed underground chambers, Chen's detector began displaying readings that violated every principle of radiation detection he had learned in 18 months of specialized training. The device showed localized pockets of intense radiation that would spike to dangerous levels for exactly 30 seconds, then disappear completely, only to reappear in different locations. More disturbing was the perfect correlation between these radiation spikes and the whispered warnings coming through his headset. Every time his detector registered abnormal readings, he would hear voices describing specific hazards with scientific precision. Cesium-137 concentration critical level. Avoid northeast corner of Building 4. Structural integrity compromised by chemical corrosion. Chemical burn hazard. Sodium hydroxide spill expanding. Neutralization required before safe passage. Breathing apparatus malfunction detected. Check oxygen supply immediately. Backup system activation recommended. The last warning sent a jolt of adrenaline through Chen's system. He immediately checked his air supply and discovered that his primary oxygen tank was indeed showing lower pressure than expected, dropping from 3,200 psi to 2,800 psi in just 30 minutes, when it should have depleted much more slowly. The leak was small, but potentially fatal if not detected early. He switched to his emergency backup system and radioed Dr. Walsh to check her equipment as well. Her primary air supply was also depleting faster than normal, suggesting a problem with their life support systems that could have killed both of them within 2 hours if the supernatural warning hadn't alerted them to the malfunction. Command, Unit Charlie 7. Both team members have primary air supply anomalies. Leak rates approximately 15 psi per minute. Cause unknown. Switching to backup systems and recommend immediate technical evaluation of our life support equipment. Unit Charlie 7, copy that. Technical team is reviewing your equipment specifications and maintenance records. Consider this a priority safety issue. Do you need immediate extraction? Chen looked at Dr. Walsh, who was taking crucial soil samples near what had once been the facility's main chemical storage area. Her readings were providing vital data about contamination migration that could affect thousands of people living near the exclusion zone boundary. The EPA had been trying to get this ground truth data for months, and aborting the mission now could delay critical public safety decisions. Command, we need 90 more minutes to complete the contamination survey. Our backup systems are functioning normally at full capacity, and we're maintaining all safety protocols. We'll advise if situation changes. But as they continued their work, the supernatural warnings became more frequent and more specific. Chen began to realize that the voices weren't random emergency chatter. They seemed to be intelligently guiding him away from genuine hazards while directing him toward areas where important evidence could be found. At 10:15 hours, his detector began clicking frantically, while multiple voices urged him to investigate a collapsed section of Building 9, an area that hadn't been on their planned survey route. Following the supernatural guidance, Chen discovered a previously unknown chemical storage tank that had been buried under debris for nearly 4 decades. The tank was massive, at least 10,000 gallons capacity, and it was slowly leaking a compound that Dr. Walsh's analysis showed was creating groundwater contamination far beyond what EPA models had predicted. The leaked chemicals were creating a plume that extended nearly 2 miles from the facility and was moving directly toward the aquifer that supplied water to the town of Rosamond, population 18,000. "This is incredible," Dr. Walsh said as she collected samples from around the hidden tank, her voice tight with concern. "This storage vessel isn't on any of the facility blueprints we have. The chemical signature suggests it contains compounds that were never reported to EPA. If we hadn't found this, the contamination plume would have reached the municipal water supply within 6 months." Chen was beginning to understand that whatever was communicating through his radiation detector was not only trying to help them identify environmental hazards, but was providing information that could prevent a major public health disaster. The hidden tank contained enough toxic material to contaminate the drinking water for nearly 20,000 people. As Dr. Walsh continued her analysis, Chen's detector began producing a continuous stream of technical data that shouldn't have been possible for the device to generate. Chemical analysis: 40% trichloroethylene, 25% perchloroethylene, 20% benzene compounds, 15% radioactive isotopes including cesium-137 and strontium-90. Groundwater flow rate 2.3 feet per day northeast toward municipal wells. Estimated contamination arrival 180 days current date. The information was incredibly detailed and technically accurate, far beyond what his handheld detector could normally provide. But when Chen checked the device's display, it showed only standard radiation readings with no indication that it was somehow generating complex chemical analysis data. "Dr. Walsh, are you getting this chemical breakdown information on your equipment?" "Someone or something is providing detailed analysis of the tank contents through my radio system." Dr. Walsh looked up from her portable laboratory setup, where she was running preliminary tests on the soil samples. "Officer Chen, I'm getting similar readings on my spectrometer, but it's taking me 20 minutes to analyze each sample. How are you getting instant chemical analysis?" Chen couldn't explain it, but he was beginning to trust the supernatural guidance more than his official equipment. The voices had already saved their lives by warning about the air supply malfunction, and now they were providing information that could prevent a major environmental disaster. The breakthrough in understanding came when Chen decided to research the history of the Meridian Chemical Processing Facility disaster, while Dr. Walsh continued her fieldwork. Using his patrol vehicle's mobile computer terminal and secure satellite internet connection, he accessed FAP-classified archives and discovered that the 1987 accident had killed 12 emergency responders who had entered the facility during the initial crisis response. The incident report made for grim reading. At 14:37 hours on March 15, 1987, a catastrophic explosion in Building 7 had released a cloud of mixed toxic chemicals that spread across the facility within minutes. The initial emergency response had been led by FAP officer Daniel Morrison, a chemical response unit specialist with 8 years of experience in hazardous materials incidents. Morrison and his 11-person team had entered the contaminated zone to coordinate evacuation efforts and establish containment protocols. They had continued working even as toxic exposure began affecting their health, transmitting crucial hazard warnings and safety information until the very end. Morrison's final radio transmission, preserved in the incident archives, had come at 16:23 hours. "Command, this is Unit 7 Alpha. We've located the primary leak source in Building 12 basement level. Estimate 50,000 gallons mixed chemicals released. Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel within 2-mile radius. Chemical interaction creating toxic gas cloud. We're not going to make it out. Tell our families." The transmission had ended there. Morrison and his team had been overcome by toxic exposure, their bodies not recovered for 3 days due to the extreme contamination levels. But their sacrifice had provided the information needed for other responders to safely extract survivors and contain the chemical release, preventing an even greater disaster. As Chen read Morrison's final transmission, he realized that the voice he had been hearing through his radiation detector matched exactly the speech patterns and technical vocabulary described in Morrison's personnel file. Morrison had been known for his precise use of chemical terminology and his calm delivery of critical information, even under extreme stress. Chen was now certain that somehow his radiation detector was picking up Morrison's communications, not as historical recordings, but as ongoing warnings about current hazards in the contaminated zone. Morrison's spirit, along with his fallen team members, seemed to be continuing their mission of protecting people from the chemical dangers that had claimed their own lives. The phenomenon reached its peak intensity when Chen and Dr. Walsh approached the exact location where Morrison's team had died. According to the incident reports, they had been trapped in the basement of Building 12 when a secondary explosion collapsed the structure above them. The area was now marked with a memorial plaque and was considered the most contaminated part of the entire site. Chen's detector began producing a continuous stream of warnings, not just about immediate hazards, but about long-term contamination patterns that would affect the area for decades to come. Plutonium isotope migration detected, underground water table contaminated at depth 15 feet, flow direction northeast toward residential area 2.3 kilometers. Recommend permanent evacuation of farm properties along Highway 58. Chemical interaction with geological formation, creating hydrogen sulfide emissions, gas accumulation in low-lying areas, lethal concentration possible during atmospheric inversion conditions, radioactive cesium binding with clay particles, topsoil contamination extending beyond current perimeter. Recommend expansion of exclusion zone by 40% to protect civilian population. The warnings were providing information that would normally require months of environmental testing and computer modeling to determine. Morrison's team was somehow sharing knowledge they had gained through their fatal exposure to the facility's most dangerous chemicals, information that could only be obtained by someone who had experienced the contamination at its most intense levels. Dr. Walsh was documenting everything, her excitement growing as she realized the implications. Officer Chen, if this information is accurate, we're looking at contamination levels and migration patterns that are far more serious than anything we've previously detected. This could affect environmental policy for the entire region. But Chen was focused on something else entirely. As they worked near the memorial site, he began hearing individual voices instead of overlapping chatter. One voice in particular came through clearly. Morrison himself, speaking directly to Chen. "Officer Chen, can you hear me clearly now? We've been trying to warn people about the hidden contamination for 37 years. The official reports miss so much. There are chemical reactions still happening underground, creating new toxic compounds that didn't exist when we died." Chen found himself responding aloud, despite the impossibility of the situation. "Officer Morrison, is that really you? How are you communicating through my equipment? The radiation, it's not just energy, it's information. Our final moments are somehow encoded in the electromagnetic field of this place. We can interact with detection equipment that's sensitive enough. Your detector is picking up our final transmissions, but they're happening in real time, showing you current dangers." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Morrison's spirit providing detailed information about contamination sources that had never been identified. He described underground chemical storage areas that weren't on any official maps, reaction processes that were creating new toxic compounds decades after the original accident, and migration patterns that threatened communities far beyond the current exclusion zone. "There's something else you need to know," Morrison's voice continued. "The chemicals from our facility, they weren't just industrial solvents. Some of them were experimental compounds for biological weapons research, never officially documented. If they reach the water supply, the effects could be generational, genetic damage that lasts for decades." This revelation changed everything. Chen immediately radioed for additional support and began documenting every piece of information Morrison provided. If the contamination included undisclosed biological weapons components, the threat to public health was far greater than anyone had realized. Dr. Walsh's field analysis confirmed many of Morrison's claims. She was detecting organic compounds that incorporated both chemical and biological elements, suggesting that some of the contamination was capable of causing genetic damage or triggering autoimmune responses in exposed populations. "We need to expand our investigation," she told Chen. "If Officer Morrison's information is accurate, we're dealing with contamination that poses threats we've never considered. The health effects could include birth defects, cancer clusters, and immune system disorders affecting multiple generations." Over the next 4 hours, guided by Morrison's spirit and his team, Chen and Dr. Walsh conducted the most comprehensive contamination survey ever performed at the Meridian site. They identified 17 previously unknown contamination sources, mapped underground chemical migration routes that extended far beyond the current exclusion zone, and documented evidence of ongoing chemical reactions that were creating new toxic compounds. Morrison's team provided specific coordinates for every hazard, detailed chemical analysis of contamination sources, and precise information about wind patterns and atmospheric conditions that could spread toxic vapors to populated areas. The information was incredibly detailed and completely accurate, verified by Dr. Walsh's independent testing. Grid reference 34.95 degrees north, 118.42 degrees west. Underground storage tank containing 15,000 gallons mixed solvents. Tank integrity compromised. Estimated leak rate 50 gallons per month for past 18 years. Contamination plume extending 800 meters southeast. Building 15 foundation, concrete cracking due to chemical corrosion. Toxic gases venting through fissures. Recommend sealed collection system to prevent atmospheric release. Subsurface chemical reaction zone, temperature elevation indicating ongoing process, creating methane gas accumulation, explosion risk during dry weather conditions. Each warning led to the discovery of genuine hazards that posed immediate or long-term threats to public safety. Chen began to understand that Morrison and his team weren't just providing information. They were conducting a comprehensive environmental investigation, using knowledge they had gained through their fatal exposure to every chemical compound in the facility. As the day progressed, other voices joined Morrison's communications. Chen heard from environmental engineer Patricia Santos, who had died trying to contain a chlorine gas leak, hazmat specialist Robert Kim, who had been overcome while mapping contamination sources, and emergency coordinator Lisa Chen, who had continued directing evacuation efforts even as toxic exposure affected her ability to breathe. Each team member provided expertise in their specialized areas, creating a supernatural environmental response team that was more knowledgeable about the site's hazards than any living expert. They had experienced the contamination at its source, during its most dangerous phase, and their spirits retained detailed information about chemical processes that continued to threaten public safety decades later. The investigation culminated when Morrison's team guided Chen and Dr. Walsh to a discovery that would reshape environmental policy for the entire region. Hidden beneath Building 7, in a concrete bunker that had survived the original explosion, they found a cache of documents that detailed the true nature of the chemical compounds that had been produced at the Meridian facility. The papers, preserved in waterproof containers, revealed that the facility had been producing experimental chemical agents for biological weapons research under a classified Defense Department contract. The compounds were designed to cause long-term genetic damage and could remain active in the environment for decades, exactly as Morrison had warned. "This explains everything, Doctor," Walsh said as she photographed the documents. "These chemicals weren't just industrial accidents. They were weapons designed to persist in the environment and cause generational damage. The contamination we're seeing isn't decreasing over time. It's actually becoming more dangerous as the compounds interact with natural processes." The documentation showed that over 200,000 gallons of these experimental agents had been stored at the facility, far more than had ever been reported to environmental agencies. The 1987 explosion had released not just the chemicals that were acknowledged publicly, but dozens of classified compounds that posed unprecedented environmental threats. Morrison's voice came through Chen's detector one final time as they prepared to leave the site. "Now, you understand why we couldn't rest. Why we had to keep warning people. These chemicals will remain dangerous for generations. Someone has to protect the living from what we helped create. Our job isn't finished until every source of contamination is identified and contained." The investigation results led to one of the largest environmental emergencies in California history. Based on the information provided by Morrison's team and confirmed by Dr. Walsh's analysis, the EPA immediately expanded the exclusion zone by 60%, relocating over 300 families from areas that were determined to be at risk of toxic exposure. The newly discovered contamination sources required a complete redesign of the site's containment systems. Federal agencies launched a $2.3 billion remediation project that would take 8 years to complete, involving the removal of millions of tons of contaminated soil and the installation of sophisticated groundwater treatment systems. Chen's documentation of the supernatural communications became part of the official investigation record, though it was classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. The information provided by Morrison's team was so accurate and detailed that environmental experts were forced to acknowledge that the communications had scientific value, regardless of their inexplicable source. Dr. Walsh's final report to the EPA described the investigation as unprecedented in its scope and accuracy, providing contamination data that would have been impossible to obtain through conventional means. She noted that the information sources, while unconventional and scientifically unexplainable, had prevented what could have been one of the worst environmental disasters in American history. The expanded exclusion zone protected over 50,000 people from long-term chemical exposure, and the comprehensive remediation project removed contamination sources that could have threatened public health for generations. The groundwater treatment systems prevented toxic chemicals from reaching municipal water supplies that served 3 counties. Chen continued working in Sector 7 Alpha throughout the 8-year cleanup operation, and he maintained regular communication with Morrison's team through his radiation detector. The supernatural guidance never interfered with official operations or endangered personnel. Instead, it enhanced the ability of living responders to identify and contain environmental hazards. Other FAP officers working in the expanded contaminated zone began reporting similar experiences: equipment anomalies that led to important discoveries, radio transmissions that provided crucial safety warnings, and an inexplicable ability to locate hidden sources of contamination. The phenomenon seemed to spread as more personnel became involved in the remediation project, creating a network of communication between living and dead responders. Chen documented over 400 instances of supernatural guidance during the cleanup operation. each one leading to the discovery of genuine environmental hazards or providing information that improved worker safety. The ghostly warnings had an accuracy rate of 100%, never leading investigators toward false hazards or away from genuine dangers. The communications evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated as Morrison's team learned to work more effectively with modern detection equipment. They began providing real-time updates on weather conditions that could affect contamination spread, warnings about equipment malfunctions before they became dangerous, and detailed instructions for safely approaching contamination sources. Wind shift detected, atmospheric inversion developing, recommend suspension of excavation operations for 2 hours until air current patterns stabilize. Equipment malfunction warning, hydraulic system pressure loss in excavator unit 7. Operator should shut down immediately to prevent catastrophic failure. New contamination source identified. Follow electromagnetic anomaly bearing 285 degrees from current position. Buried tank containing experimental compounds requiring specialized disposal protocols. Each warning was accompanied by technical information that helped living responders make informed decisions about safety procedures and operational priorities. Morrison's team had become an integral part of the environmental response, providing knowledge and guidance that couldn't be obtained from any other source. The relationship between the living and dead responders reached its peak during a crisis in the 5th year of the cleanup operation. A major earthquake damaged several containment systems simultaneously, threatening to release toxic chemicals that could have affected hundreds of square miles. Morrison's team provided continuous guidance during the 72-hour emergency response, directing repair teams to the most critical failures and warning them away from areas where aftershocks could cause additional damage. Their knowledge of the site's underground infrastructure, gained through their fatal exposure to every contamination source, proved invaluable in prioritizing repair efforts. Critical containment failure at grid reference, 34.94 degrees north, 118.41 degrees west. Estimate 2,000 gallons per hour leak rate. Chemical interaction with fractured concrete creating toxic gas emissions. Repair priority alpha. Structural instability detected. Building 3 foundation shifted during seismic event. Collapse risk high during aftershock activity. Recommend evacuation of all personnel within 100-meter radius. Emergency backup containment systems operational. Redirect contaminated groundwater flow through secondary channels, valve positions, main line closed, backup lines 2 and 4 open at 60% flow rate. The supernatural guidance helped prevent what could have been a complete failure of the containment systems, potentially saving thousands of lives and preventing environmental damage that could have taken decades to remediate. On the final day of the cleanup operation, December 15, 2032, as the last contaminated materials were transported to secure disposal facilities, Chen's radiation detector transmitted a final message that brought tears to his eyes. Zone secure, primary mission complete, contamination contained and neutralized. Thank you for finishing what we started. Our watch is ending. May others learn from our sacrifice and remember that some duties transcend death itself. The detector then went completely silent, never again producing the anomalous readings or supernatural communications that had guided the environmental response for 8 years. Morrison and his team had completed their extended mission, ensuring that the contamination that had claimed their lives would no longer threaten others. Today, the former Sector 7 Alpha has been reclassified as a controlled monitoring zone, with regular FAP patrols ensuring that the remediation remains effective. The site now serves as a training facility for environmental responders from across the country, teaching the next generation of hazmat specialists about chemical contamination and environmental protection. Chen still leads these training patrols, and he always carries the same radiation detector that connected him to Morrison's team. The device now functions normally, providing standard readings with no supernatural communications, but Chen keeps it as a reminder of the partnership that transcended life and death. He begins each training session by taking new officers to the memorial site where Morrison's team died, explaining the importance of environmental protection and the sacrifices that have been made to keep communities safe from chemical hazards. The memorial now includes the names of all 12 responders who died in 1987, along with an inscription that reads, "Their watch continues in the dedication of those who follow." The Meridian Chemical Processing Facility disaster claimed 12 heroes in 1987, but their sacrifice continues to protect people 5 decades later. In the most contaminated and dangerous places on Earth, the spirits of fallen first responders proved that some commitments to protecting and serving extend far beyond the boundaries of life and death. Chen learned that environmental contamination isn't the only thing that can persist for decades in a restricted zone. Sometimes, the dedication of those who died protecting others creates its own kind of permanent presence, one that watches, warns, and guides those who follow in their footsteps through the most hazardous places on Earth. In the world of forbidden area police work, the most important backup often comes from officers who can no longer respond to radio calls but refuse to abandon their posts. Their voices echo through the static of emergency communications, carrying warnings across the boundary between life and death, ensuring that their final mission, protecting others from the dangers they faced, continues forever. The radiation detector that connected Chen to Officer Morrison's team now sits in a place of honor at the FAP Chemical Response Unit headquarters. Its sensors no longer needed, but its legacy permanent. It serves as a reminder that in the most dangerous jobs, the bonds between officers transcend even death, and that the most important communications sometimes come from frequencies that exist beyond the physical world. New recruits to the Chemical Response Unit are told about the contamination whispers as part of their training, learning that environmental hazards can persist for generations, but so can the dedication of those who died fighting them. They learn to trust their equipment, follow safety protocols, and remember that in contaminated zones, they're never truly working alone. Late at night, when veteran officers are conducting training exercises with radiation detection equipment, they sometimes report hearing faint whispers through the devices, voices that offer guidance, share wisdom, and remind the living that in the Chemical Response Unit, no officer ever truly works alone. The contaminated zones may be deadly, but they are also protected by guardians whose commitment to service proved stronger than any chemical hazard they faced. Chen's experience in Sector 7 Alpha changed how the FAP approaches work in contaminated environments. While the official protocols still focus on equipment, training, and safety procedures, there's an unofficial understanding among officers that some of their most valuable guidance comes from sources that can't be documented in reports or entered into evidence. The contamination whispers continue to this day, heard by officers working in America's most dangerous, restricted zones. They serve as a reminder that environmental disasters may create dead zones, but they also create eternal guardians, officers whose final duty assignment lasts forever, protecting the living from the same dangers that claimed their lives. In the Chemical Response Unit of the Forbidden Area Police, every patrol is backed up by fallen heroes whose voices carry warnings through the static of emergency radios. Their messages are simple but vital. Stay alert, trust your equipment, protect each other, and never forget that some contamination can't be cleaned up. It can only be contained, monitored, and respected by those brave enough to enter the zones where others fear to tread. The whispers in the contamination zones will continue as long as there are officers willing to listen. ready to heed warnings from colleagues whose patrol never ended, whose dedication to protecting others proved more persistent than any chemical compound, and whose voices remind the living that in the most dangerous places on Earth, backup is always available. You just have to know which frequency to monitor. And in the quiet moments between equipment checks and sample collections, when the only sound is the steady clicking of radiation detectors and the whisper of wind through contaminated terrain, Chen sometimes catches fragments of conversation in the static. Morrison's team continuing their eternal patrol, watching over new generations of responders, ensuring that the lessons learned through their sacrifice are never forgotten. The contamination may fade with time, but the dedication of those who died fighting it remains as persistent as the most dangerous isotopes, continuing to protect the living long after their own watch should have ended. Proving that in the most hazardous places on Earth, the most important safety equipment isn't technology. It's the unwavering commitment of those who came before, standing guard in frequencies beyond human perception. The phenomenon documented at Sector 7 Alpha became a classified study case within the FAP, leading to the development of new protocols for investigating supernatural communications in contaminated zones. While official policy couldn't acknowledge the existence of ghost responders, experienced officers learned to recognize the signs of supernatural guidance and incorporated it into their operational procedures. Chen's detailed documentation became the foundation for what was internally known as the Anomalous Communications Protocol, a set of guidelines for FAP officers who encountered similar phenomena in other restricted zones. The protocol emphasized the importance of following safety warnings regardless of their source, documenting all unusual equipment behavior, and maintaining operational security about supernatural experiences. The protocol proved its value when similar communications began occurring at other contaminated sites across the United States. At the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington State, officers reported receiving warnings through their dosimeters about radiation hotspots that weren't detected by conventional monitoring. At the Berkeley Pit in Montana, chemical responders began hearing voices through their gas detectors that guided them away from areas where toxic vapors were accumulating. Each site had its own team of fallen responders who had died during the original contamination events, and each team continued to provide guidance to living officers working in their areas. The supernatural communications seemed to be a natural response to environmental disasters that claimed the lives of emergency responders, creating a network of ghostly guardians who refused to abandon their posts. Dr. Walsh, now serving as EPA Region 9's Chief Environmental Forensic Specialist, began quietly studying the phenomenon across multiple contaminated sites. Her research, classified at the highest levels of government secrecy, documented over 2,000 instances of anomalous communications that had led to important environmental discoveries or prevented responder injuries. The pattern is consistent across all sites, she wrote in her confidential report to the Environmental Protection Agency's director. Emergency responders who died during contamination events seem to retain detailed knowledge about site hazards and continue to provide warnings to living personnel. While the mechanism remains scientifically unexplainable, the accuracy rate of the information approaches 100%. Her research revealed that the supernatural communications were most frequent and detailed at sites where responders had died trying to protect civilian populations. The intensity of their final emotions, dedication to saving lives, determination to complete their mission, and concern for public safety seemed to create a persistent presence that could interact with sensitive electronic equipment. The communications were also more likely to occur with officers who demonstrated genuine commitment to environmental protection and public safety. Equipment operators who were simply following procedures rarely reported supernatural experiences, while officers who showed personal dedication to their work often developed strong communication links with deceased responders. Chen's connection with Morrison's team had been particularly strong because both men shared similar backgrounds and motivations. Morrison had joined the FAP Chemical Response Unit after witnessing environmental damage in his hometown, while Chen had been inspired to become an environmental officer after seeing the effects of industrial pollution on his childhood community. This personal connection seemed to facilitate communication across the boundary between life and death, creating partnerships between living and dead officers that enhanced both groups' ability to protect public safety. The supernatural guidance never replaced official protocols or compromised operational security, but it provided an additional layer of protection for officers working in the most dangerous environments. The long-term effects of Chen's experience at Sector 7 Alpha extended far beyond the immediate environmental remediation. His documentation of supernatural communications led to changes in FAP training programs that emphasize the psychological and emotional aspects of working in contaminated zones. New recruits learned about the history of each restricted area they would patrol, including the stories of officers who had died protecting others from environmental hazards. This historical knowledge helped officers understand the significance of their work and prepared them psychologically for possible supernatural encounters. The training also emphasized the importance of maintaining detailed records of all unusual experiences, creating a database of anomalous events that could be analyzed for patterns and used to improve safety protocols. While the FAP couldn't officially acknowledge supernatural phenomena, they could document equipment anomalies and unusual guidance that led to successful operations. Chen became the FAP's unofficial expert on supernatural communications, consulting on cases where officers reported unusual experiences in contaminated zones. His expertise was particularly valuable when new sites were discovered or when environmental emergencies occurred at locations with histories of responder fatalities. During a 2034 investigation of illegal chemical dumping in Nevada, Chen helped local FAP officers interpret communications they were receiving through their monitoring equipment. The voices, later identified as belonging to EPA investigators who had died in a 1998 exposure incident, provided detailed information about the chemical composition of the illegal dump and guided responders to evidence that led to the arrest of the perpetrators. Similar consultations occurred at sites across the country, as Chen's reputation for understanding supernatural environmental communications spread through the FAP community. He developed techniques for establishing communication with deceased responders, interpreting their warnings, and incorporating their guidance into official investigation procedures. The methods Chen developed were subtle but effective. He learned to ask specific questions that could be answered through equipment, anomalies, to recognize different communication patterns that indicated varying levels of urgency, and to translate supernatural guidance into actionable intelligence that could be presented to supervisors without mentioning its source. His approach became the unofficial standard for FAP officers who encountered supernatural phenomena in contaminated zones. The techniques were passed down through mentoring relationships and informal training sessions, creating a body of knowledge that existed parallel to official protocols. The impact of this supernatural guidance on environmental protection was substantial, but largely unrecognized by the public. Dozens of contamination sources were identified through ghostly communications, preventing public health emergencies that could have affected millions of people. Chemical spills were contained more quickly, illegal dumping operations were discovered before they caused permanent damage, and responder safety was enhanced through warnings about equipment failures and environmental hazards. The economic benefits were equally significant. Early detection of contamination problems prevented cleanup costs that could have reached tens of billions of dollars, while improved safety protocols reduced worker compensation claims and equipment replacement costs. The supernatural guidance had proven to be one of the most cost-effective environmental protection tools ever developed, even though its existence couldn't be officially acknowledged. Chen's career in the FAP Chemical Response Unit lasted 22 years, during which he investigated over 300 contaminated sites and documented more than 1,500 instances of supernatural communications. His work led to the remediation of dozens of environmental hazards and the prosecution of hundreds of individuals and corporations responsible for illegal chemical releases. Throughout his career, Chen maintained contact with Morrison's team through his original radiation detector, which continued to function normally in most situations but would occasionally produce anomalous readings when important environmental issues needed attention. The device became his most trusted piece of equipment, providing guidance that enhanced his effectiveness as an environmental protection officer. The detector's supernatural capabilities seemed to evolve over time, becoming more sophisticated as Chen's experience increased and his connection with the deceased responders deepened. The communications became more detailed and specific, providing not just warnings about immediate hazards but strategic guidance about long-term environmental protection priorities. In his final years of service, Chen began receiving communications that extended beyond specific contamination sites to broader environmental policy issues. Morrison's Spirit and other deceased responders would provide warnings about emerging chemical threats, guidance on developing environmental regulations, and information about industrial practices that posed long-term risks to public health. These broader communications led Chen to develop expertise in environmental policy analysis, and he began working with EPA headquarters on national contamination prevention strategies. His insights, secretly guided by supernatural communications from deceased environmental responders across the country, helped shape federal environmental protection policies that prevented contamination incidents before they occurred. When Chen retired from the FAP in 2046, he was recognized as one of the most effective environmental protection officers in the agency's history. His official record included the identification of 67 major contamination sources, the prevention of 23 potential environmental disasters, and the development of safety protocols that had prevented hundreds of responder injuries. The unofficial record, known only to Chen and a small group of trusted colleagues, included his role as the primary interpreter of supernatural communications from deceased environmental responders. His work had established a communication network between living and dead officers that enhanced environmental protection capabilities across the entire federal government. Chen's retirement ceremony was held at the FAP Chemical Response Unit headquarters, where his original radiation detector was placed in a position of honor, alongside other equipment that had played crucial roles in major environmental protection operations. The device was retired from active service but remained available for training purposes and special consultations. During the ceremony, Chen gave a speech that seemed to be directed as much toward invisible listeners as the assembled FAP officers. Environmental protection is more than a job. It's a commitment that extends beyond our individual careers and even beyond our individual lives. The officers we've lost in contaminated zones haven't really left us. They've become part of the places. They died protecting, continuing to watch over those who follow in their footsteps. The most important lesson I've learned in 22 years of a service is that we're never working alone in contaminated zones. The knowledge, experience, and dedication of those who came before us remain available to guide and protect us if we're willing to listen for their voices in the static of our emergency communications. As Chen concluded his remarks, several officers reported that their monitoring equipment had briefly displayed anomalous readings that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his words, as if the accumulated spirits of all deceased environmental responders were acknowledging his service and dedication. After retirement, Chen remained active in environmental protection as a private consultant, working with corporations and government agencies to develop contamination prevention programs. His expertise was particularly valuable in situations where conventional environmental assessment techniques were inadequate to identify all potential hazards. His consulting work often took him to industrial facilities where worker safety was at risk from chemical exposures, or where community health was threatened by illegal dumping operations. In these situations, Chen would quietly deploy the techniques he had developed for communicating with supernatural sources, often receiving guidance that led to the discovery of hidden contamination sources or the identification of safety hazards. The supernatural guidance proved especially valuable when working with industrial facilities that had long histories of chemical accidents. Many of these locations had their own teams of deceased workers or emergency responders who had died trying to prevent environmental disasters, and these spirits often provided detailed information about ongoing safety risks. Chen's reputation as an environmental consultant who could identify problems that others missed led to consulting contracts with major corporations, federal agencies, and international environmental organizations. His success rate in identifying environmental hazards and preventing contamination incidents was unprecedented, though he never revealed the true source of his exceptional insights. The phenomenon Chen had first encountered at Sector 7, Alpha, had evolved into a comprehensive supernatural support network for environmental protection operations worldwide. Deceased environmental responders from dozens of countries had begun communicating with living officers, sharing information about contamination sources, chemical hazards, and public health threats. The international network of ghostly environmental guardians provided early warning about emerging contamination threats, guided cleanup operations at complex industrial sites, and helped coordinate responses to environmental emergencies that crossed national boundaries. The supernatural communications had become an invisible but crucial component of global environmental protection efforts. Chen's role in establishing and maintaining this network made him one of the most influential environmental protection figures of his generation, though his most important contributions remained classified and known only to a small group of government officials and trusted colleagues. In 2050, at the age of 73, Chen published a memoir titled Voices in the Static: A Career in Environmental Protection. The book carefully avoided any direct references to supernatural phenomena, instead focusing on the importance of listening to experienced colleagues, trusting equipment that provided unusual readings, and maintaining dedication to protecting public health and environmental safety. The memoir became required reading for FAP officers and environmental protection specialists worldwide, who recognized the subtle references to supernatural guidance and understood the deeper meaning behind Chen's advice about listening for voices in the static and trusting equipment that seems to be providing information beyond its design specifications. Environmental protection officers who read Chen's memoir began paying closer attention to equipment anomalies and unusual readings, leading to increased reports of supernatural communications at contaminated sites worldwide. The phenomenon seemed to be spreading as more officers learned to recognize and interpret the signs of ghostly guidance. Chen's influence on environmental protection extended well beyond his direct career contributions. The techniques he developed for interpreting supernatural communications were quietly incorporated into training programs for environmental responders in dozens of countries, creating a new generation of officers who were prepared to receive guidance from deceased colleagues. The long-term impact of Chen's work became clear in the years following his retirement, as environmental protection agencies worldwide reported unprecedented success rates in identifying contamination sources, preventing industrial accidents, and protecting public health from chemical hazards. The improvement in environmental protection capabilities couldn't be officially attributed to supernatural guidance, but experienced officers understood the true source of their enhanced effectiveness. Today, more than a decade after Chen's retirement, the contamination whispers he first documented at Sector 7 Alpha continued to guide environmental protection operations worldwide. The voices of deceased responders echo through monitoring equipment at contaminated sites on every continent, providing warnings, sharing knowledge, and ensuring that the living are protected from the same hazards that claimed their lives. The legacy of Officer Daniel Morrison and his team extends far beyond the Meridian Chemical Processing Facility, where they died in 1987. Their commitment to environmental protection inspired a supernatural network of deceased responders who continue to serve and protect from beyond the grave, proving that some duties transcend the boundaries of life and death. Chen's radiation detector, now displayed at FAP headquarters, occasionally produces brief anomalous readings when new environmental threats emerge or when young officers need guidance in contaminated zones. The device serves as a reminder that environmental protection is a mission that unites the living and the dead in a common cause that extends across generations. The contamination whispers that Chen first heard in Sector 7 Alpha have become a permanent feature of environmental protection work, available to any officer who has the dedication to listen for voices in the static and the courage to follow guidance from colleagues whose watch never ended. In the most dangerous places on Earth, the most important backup comes from those who gave their lives protecting others and refused to let their sacrifice be forgotten. And in the quiet moments between equipment checks and sample collections, when the only sound is the steady clicking of radiation detectors and the whisper of wind through contaminated terrain, the voices continue, Morrison's team and hundreds of others like them, standing eternal guard over the places where they died, ensuring that their final mission of protecting the living continues forever in the dedication of those who follow in their footsteps through the most hazardous places on Earth. Officer Rebecca Martinez thought the night shift in Quarantine Zone Delta 4 would be routine surveillance work, monitoring perimeter sensors, checking access points, and maintaining security protocols in one of America's most restricted areas. What she didn't expect was for her patrol vehicle's headlights to start illuminating things that weren't there during daylight hours, revealing a hidden world of activity that defied every rule of physics and challenged everything she believed about life and death. The assignment came through official channels at 1800 hours on November 3, 2024, when Martinez received her deployment orders for a 6-month rotation to Delta 4, a classified quarantine zone located in the remote desert regions of Nevada, approximately 180 miles northwest of Las Vegas. The zone had been established in 2019, following what official documents described as a biological containment incident at a former military research facility. Martinez had been working with the Forbidden Area Police for 3 years, specializing in perimeter security and containment operations. Her record was exemplary: no disciplinary actions, commendations for professional conduct under stress, and specialized training in biological hazard protocols. She had volunteered for the Delta 4 assignment because it offered overtime pay and the opportunity to work independently, qualities that appealed to her preference for solitary duty. "Remember, Martinez," briefed Sergeant James Parker as she prepared for her first night patrol. "Delta 4 isn't like other restricted zones. The biological containment protocols are still active, which means we maintain 24-hour security, even though the original threat was neutralized 5 years ago. Your job is to ensure nobody gets in, nothing gets out, and any anomalies are reported immediately." The briefing materials were heavily redacted, but Martinez learned that the original incident had involved experimental biological agents that had required the evacuation of the entire facility and the establishment of a 5-mile exclusion zone. The area remained under federal quarantine order, officially due to concerns about residual biological contamination, though environmental testing had shown no detectable hazards for over 2 years. Delta 4 covered approximately 200 square miles of desert terrain, including the abandoned Black Rock Research Facility, several support buildings, underground storage areas, and a network of access roads that connected the various structures. The facility had been designed for maximum security and isolation, with multiple layers of fencing, motion sensors, and automated monitoring systems. Martinez's patrol route covered the outer perimeter of the quarantine zone, a 47-mile circuit that took approximately 4 hours to complete. She would make 2 full circuits per 12-hour shift, with additional time spent checking specific high-security locations and responding to any sensor alarms or equipment malfunctions. Her patrol vehicle was a specially modified Ford F-150, equipped with enhanced lighting systems, communication equipment, biological detection sensors, and emergency decontamination supplies. The truck also carried specialized night vision equipment, thermal imaging cameras, and a portable laboratory kit for field testing of potentially hazardous materials. The first anomaly occurred during Martinez's 3rd night on patrol, at approximately 01:45 hours, as she was conducting a routine check of Access Point 7, one of the main gates leading into the restricted zone. She had parked her vehicle in the standard observation position, about 100 meters back from the gate, and was using her thermal imaging camera to scan the area for any signs of unauthorized activity. The thermal camera showed normal readings. The gate structure appeared at ambient temperature, with no heat signatures indicating human or animal presence. But when Martinez switched on her vehicle's high-beam headlights to illuminate the gate area for visual inspection, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Standing directly in front of the gate, clearly visible in the bright headlight beams, was a man in a white laboratory coat. He appeared to be in his 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and he was holding what looked like a clipboard or tablet device. The figure was completely motionless, staring directly at Martinez's vehicle with an expression of urgent concern. Martinez immediately grabbed her radio to report the security breach. "Command, Unit Delta 4-1, I have visual contact with an unauthorized individual at Access Point 7. Male subject, approximately 50 years old, wearing laboratory clothing. Subject appears to be attempting to gain access to the restricted zone." Unit Delta 4-1 acknowledged. Backup units are en route. Do not approach the subject alone. Maintain visual contact and use all necessary precautions for biological contamination protocols. But when Martinez looked back toward the gate, the figure had vanished. She swept the area with her headlights, searching every possible hiding place, but found nothing. The thermal imaging camera showed no heat signatures, and the motion sensors at the gate had not triggered any alarms. "Command, Unit Delta 4-1. Subject is no longer visible. Conducting detailed search of Access Point 7 area. No thermal signatures detected, no sensor alarms activated." Martinez spent the next 20 minutes conducting a thorough search of the gate area, checking for footprints, disturbed vegetation, or any other signs that someone had been present. She found nothing. The sand around the gate was undisturbed, and there were no hiding places where a person could have concealed themselves quickly enough to avoid detection. When backup units arrived, they conducted their own search of the area and confirmed Martinez's findings. There was no evidence that anyone had been at Access Point 7, yet Martinez's description of the figure was detailed and specific enough to suggest that she had seen something real. "Sometimes the desert plays tricks on you at night," explained Officer David Chen, one of the backup units. "Heat distortion, atmospheric conditions, fatigue, they can all create optical illusions that seem completely real. It happens to everyone who works night patrol in isolated areas. Martinez accepted this explanation, though she remained troubled by the vividness of what she had seen. The figure in the laboratory coat had appeared completely solid and real, not like a mirage or hallucination. But she had no other explanation for what had occurred, and she continued her patrol without further incident. The second anomaly occurred 5 nights later, at approximately 02:30 hours, as Martinez was conducting a perimeter check along the eastern boundary of the quarantine zone. This section of her patrol route followed a gravel road that ran parallel to the outer fence line, providing access to several monitoring stations and emergency equipment caches. As she drove slowly along the road, scanning the fence line with her spotlight, Martinez noticed movement in her peripheral vision. She stopped the vehicle and turned to look more carefully, using her headlights to illuminate the area where she had detected motion. What she saw defied rational explanation. Approximately 50 meters inside the fence line, clearly visible in the bright headlight beams, was a group of people in laboratory clothing, moving purposefully between several structures that Martinez knew had been demolished years ago. The figures appeared to be conducting some kind of scientific work, carrying equipment and taking samples from the ground. Martinez counted at least 8 individuals, all wearing the distinctive white coats and safety equipment that would have been standard at the Black Rock Research Facility. They moved with the efficiency and coordination of a professional research team, completely focused on their work and apparently unaware of her presence. Command, Unit Delta-4-1. I'm observing multiple unauthorized individuals conducting what appears to be scientific activities inside the restricted zone at grid reference. Martinez paused to check her GPS coordinates. 34.7 degrees north, 116.2 degrees west. Approximately 8 subjects wearing laboratory clothing, operating equipment. Appears to be some kind of research activity. Unit Delta-4-1, confirm your location. Grid reference 34.7 degrees north, 116.2 degrees west shows Building Complex 7, which was demolished in 2021. Are you certain of your coordinates? Martinez double-checked her GPS and confirmed her position. According to her instruments, she was looking at an area where several research buildings had once stood, but which had been completely demolished and cleared during the facility decommissioning process. Command, confirming coordinates. I'm observing subjects operating in the area where Building Complex 7 used to be located. The buildings appear to be intact and occupied. There was a long pause before the dispatcher responded. Unit Delta-4-1. Building Complex 7 was demolished 3 years ago. The area you're describing is empty ground. Please confirm that you're not experiencing equipment malfunction or environmental effects. Martinez looked again at the scene illuminated by her headlights. The research buildings were clearly visible, and the laboratory personnel continued their work, moving between structures that official records indicated no longer existed. The scene was so vivid and detailed that Martinez could make out individual pieces of equipment and read some of the signage on the building walls. Command, I'm looking directly at intact buildings with active personnel. Buildings show signage indicating Biological Research Division, Containment Laboratory 7, Emergency Decontamination Station. Personnel appear to be conducting sample collection and analysis activities. Unit Delta-4-1, you are ordered to return to base immediately for equipment inspection and medical evaluation. Do not approach the area you're describing, and do not exit your vehicle under any circumstances. As Martinez prepared to leave, she took one final look at the research complex. The laboratory personnel had stopped their work and were now standing in a group, all facing her vehicle. Even at a distance of 50 meters, she could see their expressions clearly. They looked concerned, as if they were trying to communicate something important but were unable to make themselves heard. One figure, a woman in a laboratory supervisor's coat, raised her hand and pointed urgently toward a section of the fence line about 200 meters south of Martinez's position. The gesture was clearly deliberate, as if the woman was trying to direct Martinez's attention to something specific. Martinez followed the woman's pointing gesture with her spotlight and discovered a section of the perimeter fence that had been damaged, apparently by some kind of impact that had created a gap large enough for a person to pass through. The damage was fresh, with metal fragments and wire pieces scattered on the ground in a pattern that suggested recent occurrence. Command, Unit Delta 4-1, I've located a fence breach at approximately 200 meters south of my current position. Appears to be recent damage, possibly caused by vehicle impact or explosion. Gap is approximately 2 meters wide, large enough for unauthorized access. Unit Delta 4-1, acknowledged. Maintain position and secure the breach area. Repair crew and additional security units are en route. When Martinez looked back toward the research complex, the buildings and personnel had vanished. The area appeared exactly as it should according to official records. Empty ground with concrete foundations and scattered debris marking the locations where buildings had once stood. The fence breach, however, was completely real. The repair crew confirmed that the damage was recent and had been caused by an impact from the outside of the restricted zone. Tire tracks in the sand suggested that someone had used a vehicle to ram through the fence, though there was no evidence of what had happened to the vehicle or its occupants after they entered the zone. Security cameras covering that section of the perimeter had malfunctioned approximately 30 minutes before Martinez discovered the breach, showing only static during the time period when the damage would have occurred. The timing suggested either incredible coincidence or deliberate sabotage of the monitoring systems. A thorough search of the interior area revealed no signs of unauthorized personnel, but investigators did find evidence that someone had been conducting systematic searches of the demolished building sites. Soil samples had been collected from specific locations, and several pieces of debris had been moved or disturbed in ways that suggested scientific investigation. "Whatever happened here," explained Agent Sarah Connor from the FBI's Domestic Security Division, who had been called in to investigate the breach. Someone with scientific training entered the zone and conducted organized research activities. The sample collection pattern suggests they were looking for specific biological or chemical evidence. Martinez's report of seeing active research buildings and personnel was classified as a possible hallucination caused by stress and environmental factors, though investigators noted that her description of the laboratory personnel's activities matched exactly the evidence found at the breach site. The incident raised new security concerns about Delta 4, leading to enhanced monitoring protocols and increased patrol frequency. Martinez was cleared for continued duty after medical and psychological evaluations showed no evidence of impairment or instability, though she was ordered to report any further unusual sightings immediately. The third anomaly occurred 2 weeks later, and it would change Martinez's understanding of her role at Delta 4 forever. She was conducting a routine midnight patrol when her vehicle's radio began receiving transmissions that weren't coming from the FAP dispatch center. The transmissions were faint and heavily distorted by static, but they sounded like scientific communications between researchers conducting fieldwork. Martinez could make out fragments of technical discussions about biological samples, containment protocols, and safety procedures. Sample 7 shows positive results for viral replication. Recommend immediate containment protocols. Notify CDC of Category 4 biological hazard. Perimeter breach detected at access point 12. Unauthorized personnel may have been exposed. Initiate emergency decontamination procedures. Facility lockdown in effect. All personnel report to designated safe areas. Biological containment has been compromised. The transmissions continued for nearly an hour, providing detailed information about a biological emergency that seemed to be occurring in real time within the Delta IV facility. But according to official records, the facility had been abandoned for 5 years, and there were no authorized personnel anywhere in the restricted zone except for Martinez herself. Martinez documented the transmissions and reported them to the FAP dispatch center, but her radio equipment showed no record of receiving external communications. The transmissions appeared to be audible only to Martinez, and they couldn't be detected by monitoring equipment at the command center. Unit Delta 4-1. Our communications monitoring shows no external transmissions on your frequency or any adjacent frequencies. Please confirm that your radio equipment is functioning normally. Martinez performed standard equipment checks and confirmed that her radio was operating correctly. But the mysterious transmissions continued, providing increasingly detailed information about biological research activities and emergency protocols that matched the original purpose of the Black Rock Research Facility. Over the following weeks, Martinez began to recognize individual voices among the transmissions. There was Dr. Sarah Kim, who seemed to be a biological research supervisor. Dr. Michael Torres, who specialized in viral containment procedures, and Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who coordinated emergency response protocols. The voices always discussed their work with professional urgency, as if they were dealing with active biological hazards that required immediate attention. Their conversations revealed details about the facility's original research programs that weren't included in any of the official briefing materials Martinez had received. The modified influenza strain shows unprecedented transmission rates. Airborne vector confirmed. Facility quarantine protocols are insufficient to contain spread. Recommend immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel. Biological agent has exceeded Category 4 classification. Military intervention may be required. Containment failure in Laboratory Complex 7. Automated systems unable to maintain negative pressure. Manual override required to prevent atmospheric release. The transmissions provided a detailed picture of a biological research emergency that had apparently occurred at the Black Rock facility, though the official version of events described only a minor containment incident that had been quickly resolved. Martinez began researching the history of the facility using her security clearance access to classified databases. What she discovered suggested that the official story of the 2019 incident had been heavily sanitized to hide the true scope of what had occurred. According to classified incident reports, the Black Rock Research Facility had been conducting experiments with modified viral agents under contract with the Department of Defense's Biological Warfare Defense Program. The research involved creating highly contagious strains of common viruses that could be used to test biological defense systems and develop countermeasures. On March 15, 2019, a catastrophic containment failure had released multiple experimental viral agents throughout the facility. The incident had occurred during the night shift, when 17 researchers and security personnel were present in the complex. Emergency response teams had been unable to establish contact with facility personnel after the containment alarms were triggered. When hazmat teams finally entered the complex 12 hours later, they found evidence of a desperate struggle to contain the biological release, but no survivors. All 17 personnel had died from exposure to the experimental viral agents, their bodies found at their workstations where they had continued trying to implement containment protocols even as the biological agents overwhelmed their protective equipment. The official report stated that the viral agents had been successfully contained within the facility and had posed no threat to the surrounding population. The facility had been sealed, the area declared a permanent quarantine zone, and all records of the specific research programs had been classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. Martinez realized that the radio transmissions she was hearing were the final communications of the research team that had died during the 2019 incident. Somehow, their last desperate attempts to contain the biological release and protect public safety were being broadcast through her radio equipment, recreating the emergency response that had cost them their lives. The discovery that she was hearing the voices of dead researchers made Martinez's patrol duties far more meaningful and infinitely more disturbing. She was not just guarding an empty quarantine zone, she was protecting the final resting place of 17 people who had died trying to prevent a biological disaster that could have killed thousands of civilians. The supernatural communications became more frequent and more detailed as Martinez continued her night patrols. She began to recognize the research facility's layout from the scientists' descriptions of their emergency response activities, and she could follow their movements through the complex as they attempted to implement containment protocols. Dr. Sarah Kim's voice came through most clearly, apparently because she had been the senior researcher in charge of the emergency response. Her transmissions provided detailed information about the biological agents involved and the procedures that had been attempted to contain them. Agent designation Omega-7 showing airborne transmission. Estimated infection rate 90% within enclosed environment. Requires Category 5 containment protocols. Facility does not have adequate isolation capabilities. Dr. Torres is implementing manual lockdown procedures for Laboratory Wing C. Biological agents have breached primary containment in 3 separate locations. Atmospheric filtration systems are failing due to viral contamination. Recommend immediate military intervention. Civilian population within 50-mile radius at risk if agents reach surface ventilation systems. We cannot contain this alone. Someone needs to know what happened here. The transmissions revealed that the research team had continued working for hours after the initial containment failure, sacrificing their own lives in increasingly desperate attempts to prevent the biological agents from escaping the facility. Their final communication showed that they had succeeded in containing most of the release, but at the cost of their own exposure to lethal doses of the experimental viruses. Martinez began to understand that her role at Delta 4 was more than routine security patrol. The research team's spirits were still trying to protect the public from the biological hazards they had died containing, and they were using her radio equipment to continue monitoring the facility and ensuring that the quarantine remained effective. The supernatural communications became interactive when Martinez began responding to the transmissions, acknowledging the researchers' reports and providing updates on current security conditions at the facility. Dr. Kim, this is Officer Martinez with Forbidden Area Police. I'm conducting perimeter security patrol. Can you confirm current status of biological containment systems? There was a pause in the static. Then Dr. Kim's voice came through more clearly than ever before. Officer Martinez, thank you for responding. We've been trying to communicate with security personnel for a very long time. Biological agents remain contained within the facility complex, but we're detecting signs of structural deterioration in the underground storage areas. What kind of structural deterioration, Doctor? Kim? Are the biological agents still secure? Seismic activity has caused stress fractures in the concrete containment vessels. If the fractures widen, biological agents could contaminate groundwater systems, would pose significant threat to surrounding communities. Recommend immediate structural inspection and reinforcement. Martinez reported this information to the FAP Command Center, though she couldn't reveal the source without appearing to be suffering from hallucinations. Instead, she framed her concerns as routine security observations about potential structural problems in the facility. The resulting inspection revealed exactly what Dr. Kim had described: stress fractures in underground concrete structures that could potentially allow containment leakage. The fractures were repaired immediately, preventing what could have been a gradual release of biological agents into the local groundwater system. Over the following months, the supernatural communications became an unofficial but highly effective monitoring system for the quarantine zone. The deceased research team continued to observe conditions within the facility and reported any problems that could compromise the biological containment systems. Their reports led to the discovery and repair of dozens of maintenance issues that could have eventually resulted in containment failures. Ventilation system malfunctions, structural deterioration, equipment corrosion, and environmental contamination were all identified through the ghostly communications and addressed before they became serious threats. Martinez developed a routine of communicating with the research team during her patrols, receiving their reports and providing updates on security conditions and maintenance activities. The arrangement was entirely unofficial and couldn't be documented in her patrol reports, but it proved to be one of the most effective monitoring systems ever developed for a biological quarantine zone. The communications also provided Martinez with detailed information about the facility's original research programs and the specific biological agents that remained contained within the complex. This knowledge helped her understand the true importance of her security duties and the potential consequences if the quarantine zone was ever compromised. "The agents we were working with," explained Dr. Kim during one of their regular communication sessions, "were designed to be highly contagious, but with delayed symptom onset. Perfect for biological warfare because infected populations wouldn't realize they were under attack until it was too late to implement countermeasures. If these agents ever reached a populated area, the results would be catastrophic. Are the agents still viable after 5 years in containment?" Viral agents were engineered for extreme stability, designed to remain infectious for decades in adverse conditions. The containment systems are holding, but they were never intended for permanent storage. Over time, deterioration is inevitable unless active maintenance continues. This information helped Martinez understand why the Delta IV quarantine zone required such stringent security measures and why her patrol duties were so critical to public safety. She wasn't just preventing unauthorized access to an abandoned facility. She was protecting entire communities from biological agents that could cause mass casualties if they were ever released. The supernatural communications reached their peak intensity during a severe thunderstorm in April 2025, when lightning strikes caused multiple power failures throughout the facility's monitoring systems. Emergency backup power activated, but several critical containment systems experienced temporary malfunctions that could have compromised biological security. During the storm, Martinez's radio was flooded with urgent communications from the research team as they coordinated emergency response procedures from beyond the grave. Power failure in Containment Unit 7, backup generators not responding, manual activation required, or biological agents will reach atmospheric systems within 30 minutes. Underground storage vault experiencing pressure loss. Recommend immediate emergency protocol Delta 7. If containment is breached during the storm, contamination could spread through surface water drainage. Officer Martinez, you need to contact emergency response teams immediately. We're detecting multiple system failures that require immediate technical intervention. This is the closest we've come to a major containment breach since the original incident. Martinez immediately contacted the FOP Command Center and reported equipment alarms and potential containment issues, though she couldn't reveal that her information was coming from supernatural sources. Emergency response teams were dispatched immediately and arrived just in time to prevent what could have been a catastrophic release of biological agents. The storm response demonstrated the full value of the supernatural monitoring system that had developed around Delta IV. The deceased research team's continued vigilance had prevented a biological disaster that could have affected thousands of people, proving that their commitment to protecting public safety had continued long after their deaths. Following the storm incident, Martinez's role at Delta 4 evolved from routine security patrol to active partnership with the deceased research team in maintaining biological containment. She became their link to the outside world, reporting their observations and ensuring that their warnings reached appropriate authorities. The partnership was formalized when Martinez was promoted to Senior Security Specialist for Delta 4, with expanded authority to request maintenance inspections, equipment upgrades, and emergency response procedures. Her superiors attributed her exceptional performance to intuitive understanding of facility security needs, never suspecting that she was receiving detailed guidance from the facility's former research staff. Martinez's effectiveness in maintaining quarantine security became legendary within the FAP. Her ability to identify potential problems before they became serious, her detailed knowledge of facility systems and procedures, and her uncanny success in preventing security breaches earned her recognition as one of the most capable quarantine zone specialists in federal law enforcement. The supernatural communications continued for the remaining 4 years of Martinez's assignment to Delta 4. During that time, she documented over 300 instances of maintenance issues, security vulnerabilities, and potential containment failures that were identified and resolved through guidance from the deceased research team. Her partnership with Dr. Kim's team prevented dozens of situations that could have resulted in biological releases, unauthorized access by foreign agents or terrorists, and structural failures that would have compromised the quarantine zone's integrity. The ghostly monitoring system proved more effective than any technology in ensuring continuous biological containment. When Martinez's rotation at Delta 4 ended in May 2030, she had become so integral to the facility's security that her replacement required months of specialized training to assume her duties. The new officer, however, never reported receiving supernatural communications, suggesting that the connection between Martinez and the research team had been based on personal compatibility and shared commitment to protecting public safety. Martinez's final communication with Dr. Kim came on her last night of patrol at Delta 4. Officer Martinez, we want to thank you for 6 years of dedicated service. You've helped us continue our mission of protecting people from the biological hazards we died trying to contain. Your commitment to our work has given meaning to our sacrifice. Dr. Kim, it's been an honor working with your team. I hope whoever takes over will be able to continue what we've accomplished together. We'll try to establish communication with your replacement, but it may not be possible. The connection we've shared seems to be unique. If we're unable to maintain contact, please remember that we'll still be here, still watching, still trying to protect people from the dangers contained in this place. Martinez's replacement, Officer David Thompson, conducted routine security patrols for 18 months without reporting any unusual experiences. The facility remained secure, and containment systems continued to function normally, but the supernatural monitoring system that had proven so effective during Martinez's tenure was no longer available. In late 2031, Thompson reported several equipment malfunctions and structural problems that had not been detected early enough to prevent minor containment leaks. The leaks were contained and posed no threat to public safety, but they demonstrated the importance of the supernatural monitoring system that had been lost with Martinez's departure. Martinez, now working as a senior quarantine specialist at FAP headquarters, was quietly consulted about the Delta 4 incidents. Though she couldn't officially reveal the source of her expertise, she was able to provide guidance that helped resolve the containment issues and prevent more serious problems. Her unofficial consultation role led to the development of new protocols for quarantine zone monitoring that incorporated many of the techniques she had learned through her supernatural partnership. While the protocols couldn't acknowledge ghostly communications, they emphasized the importance of intuitive observation, detailed facility knowledge, and continuous vigilance in maintaining biological containment. Martinez's methods were quietly incorporated into training programs for quarantine zone specialists throughout the federal government. Officers learned to pay attention to unusual equipment behavior, to trust their instincts about potential problems, and to maintain detailed knowledge of facility histories and research programs. The techniques proved effective at other quarantine sites, where officers began reporting improved success rates in identifying maintenance issues and security vulnerabilities. While none reported supernatural communications as clear as those Martinez had experienced, many described intuitive insights and unusual awareness of facility conditions that enhanced their effectiveness. Martinez retired from the FAP in 2045 after a 22-year career that included service at 17 different quarantine zones and restricted facilities. Her expertise in biological containment security was recognized throughout the federal law enforcement community, and she was frequently consulted on quarantine protocol development and facility security assessment. Her memoir, published in 2047, was titled Guarding the Invisible: 22 Years in America's Most Dangerous Places. The book carefully avoided any reference to supernatural experiences, instead focusing on the importance of understanding facility histories, maintaining vigilant observation, and recognizing that quarantine security requires more than just following standard procedures. Environmental protection and quarantine security officers worldwide recognized the deeper meaning in Martinez's advice about listening for warnings that don't come through official channels, and understanding that the most important intelligence sometimes comes from sources that can't be documented in reports. The book became required reading for quarantine zone specialists and led to improved security protocols at biological containment facilities throughout the world. Martinez's influence on quarantine security extended far beyond her direct service, creating a new generation of officers who were prepared to receive guidance from unconventional sources. Today, Delta 4 remains under quarantine with continued FAP security patrols. The facility's biological containment systems continue to function effectively, though without the supernatural monitoring system that once provided early warning of potential problems. New officers assigned to Delta 4 are briefed on the facility's history and the importance of maintaining vigilant observation of all systems and structures. While they're not told about Martinez's supernatural communications, they're encouraged to trust their instincts and report any unusual observations immediately. Occasionally, officers report brief equipment anomalies or unusual radio static during night patrols, but none have established the clear communication link that Martinez maintained with Dr. Kim's research team. The deceased researchers continue their eternal vigil over the facility, but their ability to interact with the living appears to have been unique to their partnership with Martinez. The biological agents contained within Delta 4 remain secure, monitored by both living officers and the spirits of those who died, protecting the world from their release. The quarantine zone stands as a testament to the dedication of both the living and the dead in maintaining public safety, proving that some commitments to protecting others transcend the boundaries of life and death. Martinez's radio equipment from her Delta 4 assignment is now displayed at the FAP Quarantine Security Training Center, where it serves as a reminder that effective quarantine monitoring requires more than just technology and standard procedures. The radio occasionally produces brief bursts of static when new trainees are learning about biological containment protocols, as if the accumulated spirits of fallen researchers are still trying to share their knowledge with those who follow in their footsteps. In the quiet hours of night patrol at quarantine zones across America, officers sometimes report hearing faint voices in their radio static, voices that offer guidance, share warnings, and remind the living that in biological containment work, the most important backup often comes from colleagues who gave their lives protecting others from invisible dangers. The night patrol anomalies that Martinez first encountered at Delta 4 continue to this day, a reminder that in America's most dangerous restricted zones, the boundary between life and death becomes blurred when faced with threats that could affect the entire world. The spirits of those who died protecting others refuse to abandon their posts, continuing their vigil through the dedication of living officers who are brave enough to patrol the places where science went wrong and heroes gave everything to make it right. And in the desert silence of Delta 4, when the only sound is the whisper of wind through abandoned buildings and the steady hum of containment systems, the voices continue. Dr. Kim's team maintaining their eternal watch, ensuring that the biological agents they died containing remain secure, proving that some duties are so important they continue long after the final shift has ended. Officer Thomas Kane thought his undercover assignment in Exclusion Zone Omega-9 would be a straightforward, organized crime investigation, infiltrating a smuggling operation that was using America's most restricted areas as safe havens for illegal activities. What he didn't expect was for his surveillance equipment to start recording conversations and activities from people who had been dead for 15 years. The years, revealing a criminal conspiracy that spanned both the living and the dead. The assignment came through the FAP's Organized Crime Task Force at 0800 hours on September 12, 2024, when Kane received classified briefing materials for Operation Ghost Trail, a joint investigation between the Forbidden Area Police, FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security. Intelligence sources had identified a sophisticated criminal network that was using restricted government zones as staging areas for drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking operations. Kane had been working undercover operations for the FAP for 7 years, specializing in infiltrating criminal organizations that operated in and around America's most sensitive restricted areas. His background included military service with the Army Rangers, specialized training in surveillance techniques, and a proven ability to maintain cover identities in dangerous situations. The target zone is Omega-9, located in the Mojave Desert, approximately 120 miles east of Los Angeles, explained Special Agent Patricia Morrison during the initial briefing. The area was restricted in 2009 following a classified military incident that required permanent evacuation. Officially, it's monitored for environmental hazards, but our intelligence indicates it's being used as a hub for major criminal activities. The briefing materials revealed that Omega-9 covered nearly 300 square miles of desert terrain, including the abandoned town of Shadow Rock and the former Blackwater military training facility. The area had been evacuated following what official records described as a chemical weapons testing accident that had required the establishment of a permanent exclusion zone. Recent surveillance had detected unusual traffic patterns in and around Omega-9, with vehicles entering and leaving the restricted area during nighttime hours when no authorized personnel should have been present. Intelligence suggested that a criminal organization known as the Crimson Syndicate was using the abandoned facilities as a base for coordinating multi-state trafficking operations. Kane's mission was to infiltrate the syndicate's operations by posing as a freelance security consultant with expertise in operating within restricted government areas. His cover identity included military background, connections to private military contractors, and a criminal record that had been carefully fabricated to establish credibility with the target organization. The Crimson Syndicate was led by Vincent Viper Castellano, a former military contractor who had gone rogue after being discharged for illegal weapons trafficking. Intelligence indicated that Castellano had recruited a network of ex-military personnel, corrupt government officials, and organized crime figures to create one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises operating in the southwestern United States. Kane's initial contact with the syndicate was arranged through an FBI informant who had been working to penetrate the organization's outer circles. The informant, Marcus Webb, was a small-time arms dealer who had been arrested and flipped by federal agents 6 months earlier. Castellanos paranoid as hell, Webb explained during their first meeting at a truck stop near Barstow. He only works with people who have been personally vouched for by trusted associates, and he runs background checks that are better than most government agencies. But he's desperate for someone with your kind of expertise, someone who knows how to operate in restricted zones without getting caught. Webb arranged for Kane to meet with Tony Moretti, one of Castellanos' lieutenants who was responsible for recruitment and security operations. The meeting was scheduled for September 20th at a restaurant in Victorville, where Kane would present his credentials and demonstrate his value to the organization. Kane spent a week preparing for the meeting, studying his cover identity and developing a believable backstory that would explain his knowledge of restricted area operations. His legend included service with a classified military unit, experience working for private military contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan, and connections to black market dealers who specialized in government surplus equipment. The meeting with Moretti went smoothly, with Kane successfully presenting himself as a valuable asset for the syndicate's operations. Moretti was impressed by Kane's apparent knowledge of security protocols and his willingness to work in high-risk environments for appropriate compensation. Viper's always looking for guys who can handle the heat in places where regular criminals are afraid to go, Moretti explained. The restricted zones give us advantages that other organizations don't have. No civilian interference, no local police patrols, and government agencies that are too worried about their secrets to investigate too closely. Kane was invited to participate in a small-scale operation to demonstrate his capabilities before being considered for full membership in the syndicate. The operation involved transporting a shipment of stolen military equipment through Omega-9 to buyers in Nevada, using the abandoned facilities as a way station and security checkpoint. On October 1st, Kane entered Omega-9 for the first time as part of a 3-vehicle convoy carrying what appeared to be legitimate construction equipment, but was actually sophisticated weapons and surveillance technology stolen from military contractors. His role was to provide security and ensure that the convoy avoided detection by government monitoring systems. The abandoned town of Shadow Rock was like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. Buildings stood empty with windows broken and doors hanging open, while streets were covered with sand and debris that had accumulated over 15 years of abandonment. The military facility was even more desolate, with massive concrete structures that had been designed to withstand chemical weapons attacks, but now served as empty monuments to whatever incident had forced the evacuation. Kane's surveillance equipment, hidden in his personal gear and vehicle, began recording everything for later analysis by the task force. But within hours of entering the restricted zone, his equipment started malfunctioning in ways that would fundamentally change the investigation. His digital audio recorder began picking up conversations that weren't happening anywhere near his location. The voices were clear and detailed, discussing criminal activities with the technical precision and operational terminology of experienced professionals. But when Kane looked around, he saw only empty buildings and deserted streets. Package 7 is ready for transport. Estimate 50 kilos of product. Buyers confirmed for delivery Tuesday night at the warehouse. Security sweep complete. No federal surveillance detected. Recommend proceeding with full-scale operation. Money transfer confirmed. Swiss account shows $2 million deposited. Castellano will be pleased with this quarter's profits. The conversations continued for hours, providing detailed information about the syndicate's operations, including drug quantities, financial transactions, and operational schedules. But Kane could see no source for the transmissions, and his equipment showed no indication that it was receiving external radio signals. Kane documented the phantom communications while continuing his assigned role in the convoy operation. The information he was receiving through his surveillance equipment was incredibly detailed and accurate, matching intelligence reports that the task force had developed through months of investigation. As night fell and the convoy prepared to camp in the abandoned military facility, Kane's equipment began recording even more disturbing conversations. The voices now discussed operational details that had never been included in any intelligence briefings, revealing the true scope of the Crimson Syndicate's criminal activities. The new human trafficking route through Arizona is generating excellent profits, estimated 40 individuals per shipment. Buyers in the Middle East are paying premium rates for American citizens. Weapons shipment from the Ukrainian connection arrives next week. Includes surface-to-air missiles and advanced explosives. Buyers include domestic terrorist organizations and foreign intelligence services. The government mole in the FBI is providing excellent intelligence. We're staying ahead of all federal investigations. Recommend increasing payments to maintain cooperation. Kane realized that the Phantom communications were revealing criminal activities far more serious than simple smuggling operations. The Crimson Syndicate was apparently involved in human trafficking, international weapons dealing, and had infiltrated federal law enforcement agencies. The next morning, Kane's surveillance equipment captured something that would change the entire investigation. His video recorder began showing figures moving through the abandoned facility, conducting what appeared to be organized criminal activities. But when Kane looked directly at the areas being recorded, he saw nothing but empty buildings and deserted courtyards. The video showed men in military-style clothing unloading trucks, counting money, and coordinating complex logistics operations. The figures moved with professional efficiency, following security protocols and using hand signals that indicated advanced tactical training. Kane counted at least 20 individuals conducting synchronized activities throughout the facility, but he was apparently invisible to them just as they were invisible to his direct observation. The Phantom criminals continued their work without any awareness of Kane's presence, even when he walked directly through areas where his camera showed active operations. The video recordings revealed operational details that perfectly matched the audio communications Kane had been receiving. The Phantom criminal organization was conducting the same activities described in the conversations, providing visual confirmation of drug packaging, weapons storage, and financial transactions. As Kane continued documenting the supernatural criminal activities, he began to recognize individual figures among the Phantom operatives. One man appeared to be in command, directing operations with the authority and tactical knowledge of an experienced military officer. Based on intelligence photos, Kane identified him as Vincent Castellano himself, but according to FBI records, Vincent Castellano had been killed in a shootout with federal agents in 2009, just months before the Omega-9 exclusion zone had been established. If the Phantom figure was really Castellano, then Kane was observing the activities of a criminal organization that had been dead for 15 years. Kane began researching the history of the Omega-9 exclusion zone, using his cover credentials to access military and intelligence databases. What he discovered suggested that the official story of a chemical weapons accident had been fabricated to cover up something far more significant. According to classified military reports, the Blackwater military training facility had been used for more than just weapons testing. The facility had served as a staging area for black operations, including arms trafficking to allied governments, training of foreign paramilitary forces, and coordination of intelligence activities that violated international law. In March 2009, federal agents had raided the facility as part of a massive investigation into illegal weapons trafficking and government corruption. The raid had targeted the Crimson Syndicate, which had been using the military facility as their primary base of operations with the cooperation of corrupt military officials. The raid had resulted in a firefight that killed 17 syndicate members, including Vincent Castellano and most of his senior leadership. The incident had been covered up as a chemical weapons accident to hide the extent of government corruption and illegal activities that had been occurring at the facility. Kane realized that his surveillance equipment was somehow recording the activities of the Crimson Syndicate from 2009, showing their operations as they had existed before the federal raid that destroyed the organization. The Phantom criminals were conducting their illegal activities exactly as they had during the months leading up to their deaths. The discovery that he was observing a dead criminal organization raised profound questions about the nature of the current investigation. If the Crimson Syndicate had been destroyed in 2009, who was responsible for the recent criminal activities that had prompted Operation Ghost Trail? Kane's research revealed that several members of the original syndicate had survived the 2009 raid and had apparently reformed the organization using new personnel and operational methods. The current Crimson Syndicate was led by Michael Castellano, Vincent's younger brother, who had been in federal prison during the original raid and had been released in 2018. The new syndicate was apparently using the phantom activities of the dead organization as a template for their current operations, following the same routes, using the same methods, and even employing some of the same criminal contacts that had worked with the original group. Kane's surveillance equipment was recording both the historical activities of the dead syndicate and the current operations of the reformed organization, creating a complex picture of criminal activities that spanned 15 years and crossed the boundary between life and death. The Phantom Communications began providing specific intelligence about the current syndicate's operations, as if the dead criminals were sharing information about their successors' activities. The conversations revealed details about upcoming operations, financial arrangements, and security vulnerabilities that could be exploited by law enforcement. The new operation lacks the security protocols we developed. They're vulnerable to federal surveillance at the Phoenix transfer point. Recommend alerting authorities to intercept Tuesday shipment. Michael's organization is using our old contact in the State Department. Official is still taking bribes but has become careless. Federal investigators are already suspicious. The human trafficking route through the Tucson corridor is about to be compromised. Mexican authorities have been notified by our contacts. Recommend immediate law enforcement action to prevent loss of life. Kane realized that the dead syndicate members were providing intelligence that could be used to destroy their successors' criminal activities. The Phantom criminals seemed to be working against the current organization, sharing information that would lead to arrests and operational failures. The reason for this supernatural cooperation became clear when Kane learned more about the circumstances of the original syndicate's destruction. Many of the dead criminals had been betrayed by corrupt government officials who had used them for illegal operations and then eliminated them to hide evidence of government wrongdoing. The Phantom Syndicate members were apparently seeking revenge against the system that had betrayed them, and they were using Kane's investigation as an opportunity to expose both the current criminal organization and the government corruption that had enabled their activities. Over the following weeks, Kane's surveillance equipment continued recording detailed intelligence about both the historical and current syndicate operations. The information provided by the Phantom criminals led to the identification of major drug shipments, weapons trafficking operations, and human trafficking networks that had been unknown to federal investigators. The Phantom intelligence also revealed the extent of government corruption that had enabled the syndicate's activities. The communications identified specific officials in the FBI, DEA, State Department, and military who had accepted bribes or provided assistance to criminal organizations over a span of 15 years. Kane's role in the investigation evolved from simple undercover work to managing a complex intelligence operation that relied on supernatural sources. He developed techniques for interpreting the phantom communications and translating the information into actionable intelligence that could be used by living law enforcement officers. The breakthrough in the investigation came when the phantom Vincent Castellano began communicating directly with Kane through his surveillance equipment. The dead criminal leader provided detailed information about the current syndicate's most ambitious operation, a plan to smuggle a nuclear weapon into the United States for sale to domestic terrorist organizations. "My brother's ambition exceeds his intelligence," Castellanos' phantom voice explained during one of their communications. "He's arranged to purchase a tactical nuclear device from corrupt Ukrainian officials. The weapon is being transported through our old smuggling routes. If this succeeds, thousands of innocent people could die." "Why are you telling me this? You were a criminal yourself." "We were criminals, but we weren't terrorists. We never dealt with weapons that could kill civilians on a massive scale. My brother has crossed lines that even dead criminals won't tolerate. He must be stopped before he destroys more lives than we ever did." The phantom Castellano provided specific details about the nuclear smuggling operation, including transportation routes, security arrangements, and the identities of government officials who were facilitating the illegal transfer. The information was detailed enough to allow federal agents to intercept the weapon before it reached the United States. Kane immediately transmitted this intelligence to the task force command center, though he couldn't reveal the supernatural source without compromising his credibility. Instead, he presented the information as intelligence gathered through his undercover work and criminal contacts. The nuclear interdiction operation was launched on November 15th, with coordinated actions by FBI, DEA, Homeland Security, and international law enforcement agencies. The tactical nuclear device was intercepted at the port of Long Beach, preventing what could have been a catastrophic terrorist attack on American soil. The success of the nuclear interdiction led to the arrest of over 200 individuals connected to the reformed Crimson Syndicate, including Michael Castellano and several corrupt government officials who had been facilitating the organization's activities. The operation was one of the largest organized crime investigations in federal law enforcement history. Kane's undercover work had been instrumental in the investigation's success, though the true source of his most valuable intelligence remained his secret. The phantom communications from the dead syndicate members had provided information that would have been impossible to obtain through conventional investigative methods. Following the successful conclusion of Operation Ghost Trail, Kane continued working undercover operations for the FAP, but he never again experienced supernatural communications as clear and detailed as those he had received in Omega-9. The Phantom Criminal Organization seemed to have completed their mission of exposing their successors and achieving revenge against the system that had betrayed them. Kane's final communication with the Phantom Vincent Castellano came as he was preparing to leave the exclusion zone. "Thank you for listening to us, for using our information to stop something that would have been far worse than anything we ever did. We were criminals, but we weren't monsters. Now, our deaths have finally served a purpose greater than our lives. Will you be able to rest now? Perhaps. We've done what we could to balance the scales. The living will have to protect themselves from here. But remember that not all criminals are beyond redemption. Sometimes the dead can serve justice better than the living." Kane never reported the supernatural communications in his official case reports, but he documented every conversation and piece of intelligence in personal records that were classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. His documentation became part of a specialized FBI program that studied unusual intelligence sources in major criminal investigations. The techniques Kane developed for interpreting supernatural communications were quietly incorporated into advanced undercover training programs, teaching agents to recognize and utilize unconventional intelligence sources while maintaining operational security and personal credibility. Kane's success in Operation Ghost Trail led to promotion within the FAP's Organized Crime Task Force and assignments to increasingly complex international investigations. His reputation for developing reliable intelligence sources and uncovering hidden aspects of criminal organizations made him one of the most requested undercover specialists in federal law enforcement. Throughout his subsequent career, Kane occasionally encountered situations where his surveillance equipment picked up phantom communications or recorded activities from people who were no longer alive. He learned to recognize these supernatural intelligence sources and to extract actionable information while maintaining the secrecy necessary to protect his effectiveness as an undercover officer. The phantom intelligence phenomenon seemed to occur most frequently in cases involving serious crimes where the dead had personal connections to the criminal activities being investigated. Former victims of criminal organizations, deceased law enforcement officers, and even dead criminals who had been betrayed by their associates all provided information that helped solve cases and prevent future crimes. Kane's expertise in interpreting supernatural intelligence made him a valuable consultant for other federal agencies investigating complex criminal organizations. His methods were particularly effective in cases involving historical criminal activities that had connections to current investigations. The long-term impact of Kane's work extended far beyond individual investigations. The intelligence provided by phantom sources led to the exposure of corruption networks that had operated within government agencies for decades, the prevention of multiple terrorist attacks, and the dismantling of criminal organizations that had seemed impossible to penetrate through conventional methods. Kane retired from undercover work in 2043 after a 19-year career that included successful investigations of over 50 major criminal organizations. His techniques for developing and utilizing unconventional intelligence sources had become standard training material for federal law enforcement agencies worldwide. His memoir, published in 2045, was titled Shadows and Echoes: An Undercover Officer's Journey Through America's Hidden Criminal World. The book carefully avoided any direct references to supernatural experiences, instead focusing on the importance of listening to all available sources of information and recognizing that criminal investigations often reveal connections between past and present that aren't immediately obvious. Law enforcement officers worldwide recognized the deeper meaning in Kane's advice about paying attention to voices that others can't hear, and understanding that the most valuable intelligence sometimes comes from sources that don't appear in official databases. The book became required reading for undercover specialists and led to improved investigative techniques that emphasize the importance of historical research, attention to unusual patterns, and willingness to consider unconventional explanations for complex criminal activities. Today, Omega-9 remains a restricted zone under FAP supervision, though it's no longer used for criminal activities following the destruction of the Crimson Syndicate. The area serves as a training facility for federal law enforcement agencies, teaching officers about the importance of thorough investigation and the value of understanding historical contexts in criminal cases. New agents assigned to organized crime investigations are briefed on the importance of researching the complete history of criminal organizations, including the fates of former members and the circumstances surrounding major law enforcement actions. While they're not told about Kane's supernatural communications, they're encouraged to consider all possible sources of information and to remain open to unexpected intelligence opportunities. Kane's surveillance equipment from the Omega-9 investigation is now used for training purposes at the FAP Advanced Investigation Center, where it occasionally produces unusual readings or phantom signals when new agents are learning about electronic surveillance techniques. The equipment serves as a reminder that effective investigation requires more than just technology and standard procedures. The phantom communications that Kane experienced in Omega 9 demonstrated that criminal organizations, like other human institutions, can create lasting impacts that persist long after their official destruction. The dedication of individuals to justice and redemption can transcend death, creating opportunities for the dead to assist the living in preventing future crimes and protecting innocent people. In the complex world of organized crime investigation, the most valuable intelligence sometimes comes from sources that can't be verified through normal channels, but prove their worth through the accuracy and importance of the information they provide. Kane's experience showed that effective undercover work requires openness to all possible sources of intelligence, regardless of how unconventional they might appear. The shadow network that Kane discovered in Omega 9 included both living and dead criminals, corrupt officials, and phantom informants who bridge the gap between past and present criminal activities. His ability to navigate this supernatural criminal underworld and extract actionable intelligence made him one of the most effective organized crime investigators in federal law enforcement history. And in the abandoned buildings of Omega 9, where the only sound is the whisper of desert wind through broken windows and the distant hum of monitoring equipment, the voices continue. Phantom criminals sharing intelligence, seeking redemption, and proving that even in death, some individuals can choose to serve justice rather than perpetuate the crimes that defined their lives. The investigation techniques that Kane developed continue to influence organized crime investigations worldwide, creating a new generation of undercover officers who understand that the most dangerous criminals often leave traces that persist long after their deaths, and that the most valuable allies in fighting organized crime sometimes come from the most unexpected sources, including the voices of the dead who refuse to let their knowledge die with them. Kane's legacy in federal law enforcement extends far beyond his individual investigations. His work established principles for utilizing unconventional intelligence sources that have enhanced the effectiveness of organized crime investigations on every continent, proving that in the fight against criminal organizations, the most important allies sometimes come from frequencies that exist beyond the physical world. The shadow network investigation remains classified at the highest levels of government secrecy, but its impact on law enforcement methodology continues to influence how federal agencies approach complex criminal conspiracies. Kane's techniques for interpreting supernatural intelligence have become an unofficial but crucial component of advanced investigative training, preparing officers to recognize and utilize all available sources of information in their pursuit of justice. In training facilities across America, new undercover officers learn about the importance of thorough preparation, careful observation, and willingness to consider unconventional explanations for complex criminal phenomena. While they may not encounter phantom criminals as clearly as Kane did in Omega 9, they're prepared to recognize supernatural assistance when it appears, and to use such intelligence effectively while maintaining their cover and credibility. The voices in the shadows of America's restricted zones continue to whisper warnings, share intelligence, and guide living investigators toward evidence that could prevent future crimes. These phantom communications serve as a reminder that in the fight against organized crime, the boundary between life and death becomes irrelevant when faced with the need to protect innocent people from those who would exploit and harm them. Kane's experience in Omega 9 proved that some criminals, when faced with the ultimate consequences of their actions, choose redemption over revenge, using their knowledge to prevent greater crimes and their deaths to serve a justice that eluded them in life. The phantom criminals of the Shadow Network became some of the most effective informants in federal law enforcement history, providing intelligence that saved lives and prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of innocent people. And in the quiet moments between surveillance operations and intelligence briefings, When undercover officers are alone with their equipment in the most dangerous places on Earth, they sometimes hear whispers in the static, voices offering guidance, sharing secrets, and reminding the living that in the fight against organized crime, the most important backup often comes from colleagues whose cover identities became permanent, whose undercover work continues from beyond the grave, and whose commitment to justice proved stronger than death itself. The full scope of Kane's supernatural intelligence network became apparent in the months following Operation Ghost Trail, when his techniques were quietly implemented in other high-priority investigations. The phantom communications phenomenon seemed to occur most frequently in locations where violent crimes had claimed the lives of individuals with strong motivations to see justice served, regardless of which side of the law they had originally represented. Kane's next major assignment came in January 2025, when the FAP received intelligence about a new criminal organization operating out of Restricted Zone Alpha 12, a former CIA black site facility in the mountains of Colorado. The zone had been abandoned following a 2008 incident that officially never occurred, but intelligence suggested that the isolated location was being used for human trafficking operations by an international criminal syndicate. The assignment was particularly challenging because Alpha 12 had been the site of enhanced interrogation programs that had resulted in the deaths of at least 30 detainees between 2003 and 2008. The facility had been hastily abandoned when congressional investigations began examining the CIA's detention and interrogation programs, leaving behind a legacy of trauma and unfinished business that seemed to permeate the entire area. Kane's cover identity for this operation was that of a former military contractor with expertise in prisoner transportation and secure detention facilities. His mission was to infiltrate the trafficking organization by offering his services as a specialist in moving high-value prisoners without detection by law enforcement agencies. Within hours of entering Alpha 12, Kane's surveillance equipment began picking up communications that clearly originated from the facility's dark past. The voices were those of former CIA officers, military contractors, and even some of the detainees who had died during interrogation sessions. Unlike his previous experience with phantom criminals, these voices carried the weight of moral complexity and unresolved guilt that made their communications far more emotionally disturbing. The enhanced interrogation protocols were never supposed to result in fatalities. We crossed lines that should never have been crossed. The information we obtained wasn't worth the lives we destroyed. Someone needs to know the truth about what happened here. The voice belonged to Dr. Patricia Wells, a former CIA psychologist who had supervised interrogation programs at Alpha 12 until her death in a car accident in 2009. According to classified records that Kane accessed through his FAP credentials, Dr. Wells had been attempting to reform the interrogation programs when she died, having concluded that the techniques being used were both morally wrong and operationally ineffective. Dr. Wells' phantom communications provided detailed information about the current human trafficking operations, but they also revealed the psychological techniques being used by the criminal organization to break down their victims' resistance. The traffickers were employing modified versions of the same enhanced interrogation methods that had been used on terrorist suspects, applying them to innocent victims to facilitate their exploitation. The current operators are using our interrogation manuals. They've adapted the psychological pressure techniques for trafficking purposes. The victims are being subjected to systematic psychological destruction before being sold. We need to stop this before more innocent people suffer the way our detainees suffered. Kane found himself in the unique position of receiving intelligence from phantom sources who were seeking redemption for their past actions while simultaneously trying to prevent current crimes. The dead CIA officers and contractors were using their knowledge of coercive techniques to help Kane understand how the trafficking operation was controlling its victims and maintaining operational security. The complexity of the supernatural communications increased when Kane began receiving information from the phantom voices of former detainees who had died during interrogation. These communications were particularly difficult to process, as they came from individuals who had been both victims of government torture and sources of intelligence about terrorist activities. "We suffered here, but we do not want others to suffer the same way. The men who run this place now are worse than those who held us. They torture innocents for profit rather than information. Use what we learned through our pain to stop them." The voice belonged to Ahmad Hassan, a suspected al-Qaeda operative who had died during interrogation in 2006. His phantom communications revealed that the current trafficking organization was using the facility's underground detention cells, which had been designed to psychologically isolate and disorient prisoners to house trafficking victims before they were transported to buyers. Hassan's intelligence was remarkably detailed, including information about the physical layout of the facility, security procedures used by the traffickers, and the psychological methods being employed to control victims. His knowledge came from personal experience with the facility's detention systems, providing insights that no living intelligence source could match. The Supernatural Intelligence Network at Alpha 12 included voices from all sides of the facility's dark history: CIA officers seeking redemption, military contractors trying to atone for their participation in torture programs, detainees who wanted to prevent others from suffering similar fates, and even medical personnel who had been forced to participate in activities that violated their professional ethics. Dr. Sarah Kim, a military physician who had died of a drug overdose in 2010 after leaving the military, provided medical intelligence about the trafficking operation. The victims are being systematically weakened through controlled malnutrition and sleep deprivation, the same techniques we use to make detainees more compliant. They're also using pharmaceutical agents to induce dependency and compliance. Medical intervention will be crucial for victim recovery. The phantom medical intelligence proved invaluable when Kane finally gained access to the trafficking operations holding facilities. Dr. Kim's communications had prepared him to recognize the signs of systematic psychological and physical abuse that the victims were experiencing, information that would be crucial for planning their rescue and recovery. Kane's undercover role required him to witness horrific abuses without being able to intervene immediately, a psychological burden that was made more bearable by the knowledge that the phantom intelligence sources were guiding him toward a comprehensive solution that would save all the victims rather than just a few. The trafficking organization, led by a former Blackwater contractor named Derek Morrison, was using Alpha 12 to process victims from multiple sources: runaway teenagers, undocumented immigrants, and even individuals who had been kidnapped from other countries. The facility's isolation and history of government secrecy made it an ideal location for activities that required complete concealment from law enforcement. Morrison's organization had recruited corrupt former government officials who had worked at Alpha 12, including CIA officers and military contractors who had lost their security clearances due to the torture program investigations. These individuals provided expertise in psychological manipulation, secure detention, and operational security that made the trafficking operation extremely difficult to penetrate through conventional investigation methods. The Phantom Intelligence Network proved crucial in identifying the full scope of Morrison's organization and its connections to other criminal enterprises. The dead government officials were providing information about Morrison's recruitment methods, financial systems, and international connections that would have been impossible to obtain through living sources. Former CIA operative James Parker, who had died of liver cancer in 2015, provided detailed intelligence about the organization's financial operations. Morrison is using the same money laundering techniques we developed for covert operations: Swiss accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, and shell companies registered in countries with bank secrecy laws. The financial network extends to at least 12 countries and involves millions of dollars in annual revenue. The complexity of Parker's financial intelligence required Kane to develop new methods for documenting and transmitting information that couldn't be directly attributed to his undercover activities. He created a system of coded communications with his task force handlers that allowed him to convey the phantom intelligence without revealing its supernatural source. Kane's investigation revealed that Morrison's trafficking operation was part of a much larger criminal network that included drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and even terrorist financing. The organization was using Alpha 12 as a hub for coordinating multiple types of illegal activities, taking advantage of the facility's secure communications equipment and isolated location. The phantom intelligence sources began providing information about the broader criminal network, revealing connections that extended to organized crime families, corrupt government officials, and international terrorist organizations. The scope of the conspiracy was far greater than the task force had initially suspected, requiring a massive expansion of the investigation. Former NSA analyst Rebecca Martinez, who had died in a car accident in 2012, provided signals intelligence about the criminal network's communications. "They're using our old encryption protocols, codes that were classified when I worked here. Someone with high-level clearance is providing them with current government communication systems. There's a mole in either CIA, NSA, or DoD who's actively supporting their operations." Martinez's phantom communications included specific technical details about encryption keys, communication frequencies, and message routing systems that allowed the task force to intercept and decode the criminal organization's internal communications. The intelligence was so detailed and accurate that it enabled law enforcement agencies to monitor the organization's activities in real time. The Supernatural Intelligence Network also provided advance warning about the organization's security procedures and Kane's personal safety. The phantom sources had developed a protective interest in Kane's mission, understanding that his success was crucial to preventing the continuation of activities that reminded them of their own participation in morally questionable government programs. Dr. Wells' phantom voice provided specific warnings about Morrison's suspicions. "He's beginning to question your background story. Recommend altering your cover to include direct experience with CIA detention programs. He wants to test your knowledge of enhanced interrogation techniques. Be prepared to demonstrate familiarity with psychological pressure methods." Following Dr. Wells's guidance, Kane adjusted his cover story to include direct experience with classified detention programs, using information provided by the phantom sources to create a believable background that satisfied Morrison's increasingly paranoid security checks. The dead government officials essentially coached Kane through the process of convincing Morrison that he was a legitimate former participant in CIA torture programs. The moral complexity of using torture-related knowledge to maintain his cover was troubling for Kane, but the phantom sources assured him that the information was being used to prevent greater suffering rather than to cause harm. The dead CIA officers and contractors seemed to find redemption in helping Kane use their knowledge to stop crimes rather than commit them. Kane's deep cover assignment lasted for 8 months, during which time he documented over 200 instances of human trafficking, identified more than 150 victims, and gathered intelligence that led to the arrest of corrupt officials in 6 different government agencies. The phantom intelligence proved indispensable in navigating the complex security procedures and psychological manipulation techniques employed by the criminal organization. The most dramatic aspect of Kane's investigation occurred when Morrison decided to test Kane's loyalty by requiring him to participate in the interrogation of a captured federal agent who had been investigating the trafficking operation. The agent, FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, had been kidnapped and brought to Alpha 12 for interrogation and elimination. Kane found himself in an impossible situation. He needed to maintain his cover by appearing to participate in the torture of a fellow law enforcement officer, while simultaneously finding a way to rescue Agent Santos and gather evidence that would lead to Morrison's arrest. The Phantom intelligence sources provided crucial guidance for navigating this crisis. Dr. Wells's voice coached Kane through the psychological aspects of maintaining his cover while protecting Agent Santos. Morrison is testing your psychological profile. He wants to see if you have the capacity for inflicting suffering. You need to demonstrate knowledge of interrogation techniques without actually causing harm. Use misdirection and suggest alternative methods that appear more effective. Ahmad Hassan's Phantom Communications provided advice from the victim's perspective. The captured agent will be expecting traditional torture methods. If you suggest psychological techniques instead of physical ones, you can appear to participate while actually reducing her suffering. Use isolation and disorientation rather than pain. This will maintain your cover while buying time for rescue. Kane successfully navigated the test by suggesting sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that impressed Morrison while actually providing Agent Santos with information that helped her maintain her mental resistance. The Phantom sources had essentially allowed Kane to appear to be an expert torturer while actually protecting the victim from serious harm. Agent Santos later testified that Kane's apparent participation in her interrogation had actually provided her with hope and information that helped her survive the ordeal. Kane had used coded communications taught to him by the Phantom sources to let Santos know that she was not alone and that rescue was coming. The rescue operation for Agent Santos became the culmination of Kane's investigation and the Phantom Intelligence Network's quest for redemption. The dead government officials provided detailed tactical intelligence about the facility's security systems, layout, and personnel deployments that enabled the task force to plan a precision rescue operation. Former CIA Security Chief Robert Chen, who had died of a heart attack in 2014, provided specific information about the facility's defensive capabilities. Morrison has installed automated weapons systems in the main corridors, motion sensors and remote-controlled guns that were part of our original security design. The control systems are in the communications center on the 3rd level. Disable those first, or the assault team will face lethal crossfire. The Phantom tactical intelligence was so detailed and accurate that the rescue operation proceeded without a single casualty among the law enforcement personnel involved. The task force was able to neutralize Morrison's security systems, rescue Agent Santos and dozens of trafficking victims, and arrest most of the criminal organization's leadership within 30 minutes of beginning the assault. Morrison himself was captured alive, though he was found in a state of apparent psychological breakdown, claiming that he was being tormented by the voices of dead CIA officers who were revealing all of his operational secrets to law enforcement. His claims were dismissed as a desperate attempt to establish an insanity defense, but Kane knew that Morrison had actually begun receiving communications from the Phantom Intelligence Network. Communications that were driving him toward mental collapse. The successful conclusion of the Alpha 12 investigation resulted in the rescue of over 300 trafficking victims, the arrest of 89 individuals involved in the criminal organization, and the identification of corruption networks within multiple government agencies. The operation was one of the largest human trafficking investigations in federal law enforcement history, with prosecutions that continued for over 3 years. Kane's role in the investigation's success was officially attributed to his exceptional undercover skills and ability to develop reliable intelligence sources within the criminal organization. The supernatural nature of his intelligence network remained classified, though his methods were studied and incorporated into advanced undercover training programs. The phantom communications at Alpha 12 gradually diminished following the successful rescue operation, as if the dead government officials and former detainees had found the redemption they were seeking through their contribution to preventing future suffering. Kane's final communication with Dr. Wells came as he was preparing to leave the facility. "Thank you for giving us the opportunity to do something good with the knowledge we gained through terrible means. We were part of programs that caused immense suffering, but through your investigation we were able to use that experience to prevent even greater suffering. Perhaps that's enough for forgiveness. Perhaps that's what redemption looks like." Kane's experience at Alpha 12 established him as the FAP's leading expert on investigations involving historical government activities and their connections to current criminal enterprises. His ability to navigate the complex moral and operational challenges of such investigations made him invaluable for cases where conventional law enforcement methods were insufficient. His techniques for utilizing supernatural intelligence sources were incorporated into a classified training program for federal agents working on investigations involving former government facilities, black sites, and other locations where official activities had resulted in unresolved moral and legal issues. The program, known internally as the Historical Context Initiative, taught agents to recognize and interpret unusual intelligence sources that might emerge in locations with traumatic histories. While the training didn't explicitly acknowledge supernatural phenomena, it prepared agents to utilize unconventional information sources while maintaining operational security and personal credibility. Kane's subsequent assignments included investigations at former military bases, abandoned CIA facilities, and other government sites where official activities had resulted in deaths or other traumatic events. In each case, he encountered phantom intelligence sources who provided information that proved crucial for solving current crimes and preventing future ones. His work at a former military chemical weapons testing facility in Utah led to the discovery of an international arms trafficking network that was selling stolen chemical weapons to terrorist organizations. Phantom communications from soldiers who had died during weapons testing provided intelligence about the location of hidden weapon stockpiles and the identities of corrupt military officials who were facilitating the trafficking operations. An investigation at an abandoned NSA listening post in Alaska revealed a cybercrime network that was using the facility's sophisticated communication equipment to conduct international financial fraud. Phantom communications from former NSA analysts who had died in accidents or from stress-related illnesses provided technical intelligence about encryption systems and communication protocols that allowed law enforcement agencies to trace and shut down the criminal network. Each investigation reinforced Kane's understanding that locations where government activities had resulted in deaths or moral compromises often became focal points for criminal activity, as if the unresolved trauma of past events created vulnerabilities that criminals could exploit. The phantom intelligence sources seemed to emerge naturally in such locations, providing guidance and information that helped resolve both current crimes and historical injustices. Kane's career reached its pinnacle with his assignment to investigate criminal activities at Site 51B, a former biological weapons research facility in Montana that had been abandoned following a catastrophic accident in 1985. Intelligence indicated that an international terrorist organization was attempting to recover biological weapons materials from the facility for use in planned attacks on civilian populations. The Site 51B investigation combined all of Kane's previous experiences with supernatural intelligence sources, as the facility had been the site of both official government research programs and subsequent criminal activities. The phantom communications came from multiple sources: government scientists who had died in the 1985 accident, military personnel who had been assigned to facility security, and even criminal figures who had attempted to exploit the site in previous decades. Dr. Michael Torres, the lead scientist who had died in the 1985 biological weapons accident, provided technical intelligence about the location and condition of remaining biological materials. The primary weapons stockpile is in Underground Vault 7. Biological agents include modified anthrax, weaponized smallpox, and experimental viral compounds. Containment systems failed during the accident, but materials remain viable. Terrorist acquisition of these agents would enable attacks that could kill millions of people. The technical intelligence provided by Dr. Torres and his research team was so detailed that it enabled the task force to locate and secure the biological weapons materials before the terrorist organization could acquire them. The phantom sources also provided advance warning about the terrorists' operational plans, security procedures, and backup locations that allowed law enforcement agencies to arrest the entire terrorist cell before they could implement their attack plans. The Site 51B investigation concluded with the safe recovery of enough biological weapons materials to supply dozens of major terrorist attacks, the arrest of 47 individuals connected to the international terrorist organization, and the identification of security vulnerabilities at other former biological weapons facilities that were subsequently addressed by government agencies. Kane's success in the investigation was attributed to his exceptional preparation and intelligence gathering capabilities, though his supernatural methods remained classified. The investigation established new protocols for securing abandoned biological weapons facilities and demonstrated the importance of understanding historical context in preventing terrorist exploitation of former government sites. Kane's final major investigation came in 2041, when he was assigned to lead a multi-agency task force investigating criminal activities at multiple former government facilities across the United States. The investigation, codenamed Operation Historical Reckoning, was designed to identify and shut down criminal organizations that were systematically exploiting abandoned government sites for illegal activities. Operation Historical Reckoning lasted for 4 years and involved investigations at over 200 former government facilities, including CIA black sites, military testing ranges, NSA communication centers, and biological weapons research laboratories. Kane's team documented criminal activities ranging from drug manufacturing and weapons trafficking to human trafficking and terrorist training operations. Throughout the operation, Kane encountered phantom intelligence sources at nearly every facility, creating a vast network of supernatural communications that provided intelligence about both historical government activities and current criminal enterprises. The phantom sources included government employees, military personnel, research scientists, and even some of the criminals who had previously exploited the facilities. The scale and complexity of the supernatural intelligence network that emerged during Operation Historical Reckoning suggested that unresolved trauma and moral compromise at former government facilities had created a persistent supernatural presence that actively worked to prevent further criminal exploitation of these sites. Kane's documentation of the phantom communications became the foundation for a classified research program studying the relationship between historical trauma and supernatural phenomena at government facilities. While the research couldn't officially acknowledge the existence of ghostly intelligence sources, it established protocols for utilizing unconventional information sources in investigations involving former government sites. The success of Operation Historical Reckoning led to the recovery of stolen government equipment and materials worth over $2 billion, the rescue of thousands of trafficking victims, the prevention of multiple terrorist attacks, and the arrest of over 1,500 individuals involved in various criminal enterprises. The operation was considered one of the most successful organized crime investigations in federal law enforcement history. Kane retired from undercover work in 2045 with a record of success that was unmatched in federal law enforcement. During his career, he had participated in investigations that prevented dozens of terrorist attacks, rescued thousands of victims from trafficking operations, and shut down criminal organizations responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in illegal activities. His techniques for developing and utilizing supernatural intelligence sources had been incorporated into training programs for federal agents worldwide, though the supernatural aspects of his methods remained classified. Kane's influence on federal law enforcement extended far beyond his individual investigations, creating new approaches to organized crime investigation that enhanced the effectiveness of agencies worldwide. Kane's post-retirement consulting work focused on training federal agents in advanced investigation techniques and helping agencies develop protocols for dealing with complex criminal organizations operating in sensitive locations. His expertise was particularly valuable for investigations involving former government facilities, historical criminal activities, and cases where conventional investigative methods had proven insufficient. His memoir, Voices from the Shadows, A Career in America's Most Secret Places, became the definitive guide to undercover investigation techniques for federal law enforcement agencies. While the book avoided direct references to supernatural phenomena, it provided detailed guidance for recognizing and utilizing unconventional intelligence sources while maintaining operational security and personal credibility. The book's influence on federal law enforcement training was immediate and lasting, with agencies worldwide adopting Kane's methods for developing intelligence sources and conducting investigations in complex criminal environments. Kane's techniques proved particularly effective in cases involving international criminal organizations, terrorist networks, and corruption within government agencies. Today, Kane's legacy continues through the thousands of federal agents who have been trained in his methods and the ongoing success of investigations that utilize his techniques for developing unconventional intelligence sources. While the supernatural aspects of his methods remain classified, their effectiveness in solving complex criminal cases has made them standard practice for federal law enforcement agencies worldwide. The phantom intelligence sources that Kane first encountered in Omega-9 and later developed into a comprehensive investigative tool continue to provide guidance to federal agents working in former government facilities and other locations with traumatic histories. These supernatural communications serve as a reminder that unresolved trauma and moral compromise can create lasting effects that transcend death, but they can also provide opportunities for redemption and justice that benefit both the living and the dead. Kane's career demonstrated that the most effective law enforcement officers are those who remain open to all possible sources of information, regardless of how unconventional they might appear. His willingness to listen to voices that others couldn't hear and to trust intelligence that couldn't be verified through normal channels made him one of the most successful undercover investigators in federal law enforcement history. The Shadow Network investigation that began Kane's career in supernatural intelligence gathering established principles that continue to guide federal law enforcement agencies in their fight against organized crime. These principles emphasize the importance of historical research, moral flexibility, and willingness to consider that the most valuable intelligence sometimes comes from sources that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional investigation methods. In the abandoned facilities and restricted zones where Kane conducted his most important investigations, new agents continue to encounter phantom intelligence sources that provide guidance, share warnings, and offer redemption to those seeking to use their knowledge in service of justice rather than crime. These supernatural communications serve as a bridge between past and present, ensuring that the lessons learned through tragedy and moral compromise continue to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. The voices in America's most secret places continue to whisper intelligence, share secrets, and guide living investigators toward evidence and insights that would otherwise remain hidden forever. Kane's career proved that in the fight against organized crime and terrorism, the most important allies sometimes come from the most unexpected sources, including the voices of the dead who refuse to let their knowledge die with them and who continue to serve justice from beyond the grave. And in the quiet moments between operations, when federal agents are alone with their equipment in the places where government secrecy and criminal enterprise intersect, they sometimes hear whispers offering guidance, sharing intelligence, and reminding the living that in the most dangerous investigations, backup comes not just from living colleagues, but from the accumulated wisdom of all those who have fought for justice before them, regardless of which side of death they currently occupy.